Alright.
That's the spirit. Hey, what up? I am Pseudo. This is SeaMonster, aka Ari.
Hello, what's up?
And I am so excited for this. We did some roaming the other day. Go check that out. Pretty cool video on YouTube. But this is, to me, this is the make or break. We're talking just a little bit while we're setting stuff up. This is the make or break patch for me. They said this is going to be the big one. Comes out on the 27th of this month. Not today, tragically. But they said like 600 changes or something, which pretty much to me means everything that isn't used in the game they have to tune up, right? Hopefully it's not like, oh, all this stuff's popular, we'll just fix all of that. You know? I don't know. What are your hopes for this patch?
I guess I'm really just hoping to see what Roy's impact on the balance team is and if they got the right idea for the future. Because, yeah, I think, like you said, for me, this is make it or break it. Like, if they get this right, I have a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I hope it's going to be multi-game mode. They sort of teased that in their teaser, where it's like AoE Specter barrier, range druid dropping stuff. Personally, I think I'd really like them to see just all of the useless traits that they clearly they have stats on that aren't used on anything, like modified or changed or updated, or not even like reworked, just put into a place where they can be used in some capacity. Like the useless vengeance trait on warrior always comes to mind. There's some stuff on NG that's quality bad. There's a lot they can do. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the dream, is to have all three traits in each slot be useful and be choosable.
Yeah. Right. Alright, got a minute. Grab a drink, sit back. We'll try not to talk over it too much, but we will be watching it, so it's gonna be fun. Alrighty. It's interesting that just real briefly, completely unrelated to Guild Wars, Twitch's new policy is the you can't simul-stream anywhere is gonna affect like big channels, like actual channels like Guild Wars or LTT or whatever, things with millions or hundreds of thousands of subscribers, because they can't simul-stream this on YouTube anymore. That's kind of stupid. I don't know. I think if it was like a real business, they'd make an exception.
Although I just realized that they have Twitch drops enabled for this balance stream, so maybe it'll get boosted viewership, which I don't know what that means, but it's amusing.
Good. Maybe I'll get a Twitch drop. Who knows? Oh, I should sign in. That's actually a good call. Hang on. I should probably not stream my login info. Hang on 1 second. That would be good. Almost did that. What is my password?
Welcome users.
Password. All right.
And Teddy killers. Please enter target identifier. Accessing high society data mosh system.
Oh, it's going. All right, let's get into it. You excited? I'm excited.
There we go. That's better. Okay.
Having fun, Roy. Good start. Good start. We're actually live.
Always.
And Roy's just figuring things out. Yeah, so there's a balance update at the end of the month. We are here to preview some of the changes, and as always, we'll be posting the release notes on the forums after. So if you have a bunch of feedback, get ready to type all that up on the forums. We'll obviously be taking a look.
Ready to type like that?
As usual, there will be some things in this stream that we cover that are not in the preview post, just due to the nature of how we send text to get editing and localized. We have a bit of time between then and the actual stream where we're still doing changes that will not even be previewed on this stream based off feedback and just some other things that we're working on for the actual patch. So keep all of that in mind. This might be a long stream today, Roy. There's a lot of
That's
stuff.
what I was thinking.
We got a pretty good patch here. Obviously, you know, we did have a little bit of a teaser, and I saw a couple people trying to figure out what we were going for that or with that. We'll show that in a moment. But yeah, good big patch coming up for June. And yeah, I think, as Cal said, make sure you can hop into it. Make sure you check out the forums after the end of the stream, as all the notes will be there in case you missed anything while we go over it on the stream. Obviously, there will be the VOD as well that you can watch back. But yes, make sure to go to the forums. And of course, as always, we will be checking out the forums for your feedback there, as well as other sources of feedback. So make sure you post your feedback there as well. And yes, let us get underway.
Good to see that their eyebrows run back.
You know, before we dive into anything particular, we do actually have a team update. It's somewhat related to the balance patch because, you know, the balance team has a team update. We have a new member on the skills team. Joined, I don't even remember. I already forgot. But
oh, this must be the person.
some of you may know him as Trig in game. He has some real name that I definitely don't remember. But he's joined the skills and balance team recently, so, you know, any changes in this update that you don't like, they are probably his doing. Still kind of learning the ropes and getting used to how things work around here. But, I mean, jokes aside, we're pretty happy to have him on the team. He's doing a lot of great work so far, and some of it you will probably actually like from this
people thinking that's serious.
Yeah.
They found someone. Now I can't blame Roy anymore. They got me.
I don't know what it is, but let's get into it. So we got a little bit of a general sort of overview, which we did talk about previously as well, the forums. But yeah, we've got improving the feeling of moment-to-moment gameplay for many boon support builds. So specifically looking at a lot of quickness and alacrity type builds. Just trying to make the gameplay sort of loops for those specs feel a lot better. We got some alternate play styles for some specializations, tuning up some underutilized weapons and solidifying their roles within their professions. And finally, we've removed almost all of the traits that have CDR baked into them, and where applicable, rolled that CDR into the skills baseline.
Yeah, so in this case, we've hit most of the utility skill cooldown reduction traits.
Right.
There might be one or two left. We haven't gotten quite to all of the profession mechanic or weapon skill type cooldown reduction traits, but they're still on our radar. And just to reiterate some of the ideas around this, I know I've probably said them before on a stream or typed them in a forum post before, but the idea of removing the cooldown reduction from these traits is to give a little bit more flexibility in how players are able to make their build. If you do want to play like Shouts on Guardian, we don't really want you to feel like Pure Voice is a required trait. It should be a nice value add, but it shouldn't be the case that you must play this trait to have a lot of value out of Shouts. And this is something that we currently do see when cooldown reduction is tied to the trait, that the trait kind of comes mandatory, and we have to balance around the trait. We have to assume that this trait is being taken and that the skill will be at a certain cooldown. And so when you aren't able to take that trait, the cooldown is probably a bit higher than is actually the proper number for the skill. So it does just make those builds a bit weaker. As we remove the CDR from traits, we're hoping that this just makes these skills a bit more available to any build of those profession, able to play like Shouts or Meditations or any of these things. In this patch, we'll see that a few of these traits are being either reworked or buffed up a little bit, trying to make sure that these traits still have value in the absence of cooldown reduction. We might, miss the mark on a couple of these, but as with a lot of our larger changes to the game, we'll be keeping a close eye on how these traits end up being after the patch and after people get their hands on them, and we'll, continue to iterate and make sure that these are viable traits going forward.
Absolutely. Moving forward, a couple sort of general specific changes as well. Cal, if you want to talk about those again.
Sure. Yeah, so some general stuff before we hop into the teaser and the profession updates. Obviously, anyone watching the stream can read, but we are updating flanking.
That's a generous assumption.
Anything that cares about striking from behind or beside an enemy.
Yeah, this is a good waste of
that
players.
There's definitely some endgame situations where this isn't super reliable. Some bosses will just flip around so quickly that it's difficult to flank, or some are either impossible to flank or it's very unclear how you are actually flanking this boss. So it makes a lot of these tools, a lot of these build components a bit less consistent. And this is similar to what we did with effects that care about striking disabled foe. We decided to just make defiant foes basically always flank. So you can, get your front stabs in and still get maximum value. when playing.
Oh
Dagger
yeah, that's
Thief.
actually huge.
And the goal here is, just make it a bit more reliable. Make sure that if you are playing a build that relies on flanking, it will be pretty consistent across all encounters.
Like, go buy all the thief runes on the trading post.
On a somewhat similar note with Confusion, we're adjusting it again in PvE to reduce the on activation trigger and bump up the pulse damage just to make it more consistent. Make sure it blows out a little bit less on some of the bosses that attack very, very quickly. We see that, especially Mesmer builds that are very reliant on Confusion can just... Their damage numbers can fluctuate very significantly based off what encounter you're fighting in, and that makes it a bit more difficult to balance the profession, make sure that it's good on all encounters without being too strong in other encounters. So this is just a step in that direction, making Confusion a bit lower variance, regardless of what boss.
I love Cal to death, but if he says the same thing 3 times for every bullet point, the stream is going to take forever. He's not wrong.
Which we did tweet out.
I'm just being impatient.
To Twitter. That was on Monday, but we'll obviously just show it again here in stream. Saw quite a few people. I think guess almost everything that was in this, which is pretty typical. I think every teaser we've ever put out has been unfortunately kind of busted pretty fast. But one thing that people didn't maybe miss is that all ranger pets are now pink moas.
Yes, we've disabled all ranger pets other than pink moa, and luckily the pink moas will not share cooldowns with each other. So when you have 2 pink moas, you can freely use.
Shut up.
But yeah, so obviously a couple of secret
Best change ever
to this image.
Also, thieves are getting
Spectre weapon swap will be locked, except not really. As usual, there is no second weapon equipped.
And they can't help it
in this
trolling.
image, and I think I still saw at least one person get tricked by that, so we'll probably continue to include that in these teasers going forward. Obviously, the meat of the secrets are, let's see, Spectre applying AoE barrier with 3 initiative missing. Very interesting. We'll talk about that later once we get into the thief profession.
Initiative per thing.
There's a spirit spawning. The Asura in this image is a ranger, as many people noticed. A spirit is being cast at a ground target location, perhaps, or at least a ranged location. And there's a mirage mirror on the screen for some reason. But we'll get to that later.
We'll have to find out later on what that's about, yeah.
That may be a mirage that spawned a mirage mirror.
Oh my god, let's go!
I also see some people thinking that we were adding War Clock to Conquest, which I thought was a pretty interesting idea. That'll potentially take some more implementation and iteration, though. So not quite for this patch, but...
Maybe
no, they got it wrong. It's Warclaw Stronghold.
No, they got yeah.
But all right, so moving on, we are going to start with Ranger. Obviously, as Cal pointed out, we got a couple notes there just from the teaser. So we're going to be reworking Sword. We're going to be reworking Spirits, as we sort of pointed out in that teaser.
That's kind of what I thought was happening.
Magic.
So no more probably quickness and alacrity on core builds.
Check and quickness will now
probably
going to
go into specializations, except for warrior, which there's no way that it'll ever give alacrity. I'm prepared to eat those words if they give it alacrity later, but I don't think that they'll be able to ever.
Big little bit of a change up there to Sword.
I think we're starting with Sword for some reason. Who made these slides? Should have started with I made the slides, but we probably should have started with Spirit rework. Anyway,
can't blame me this
time. We reworked Sword. This is one of the things that we hinted toward or kind of revealed in the last studio update as well, that Ranger Sword is on the list of weapons that we're looking to kind of solidify their roles for and make sure they have, be a strong weapon and have a well-defined role. So the role or identity of Ranger Sword is very much that mobility aspect. And that is something that exists with Ranger Sword already, but it is just a little bit clunky.
Are you ready to never be able to catch a Ranger in World versus
World? We also want to make it more of a viable power DPS weapon.
Yeah, it's like a super version of the warrior sword.
As we see with the patch notes here,
a super version of warrior.
Serpent Strike. This is now the 3 skill. It's going to be honestly pretty similar to Monarch Sleep, but it has a nice Serpent Strike animation or effect tied to it. It's now going to be an evade, so that's obviously going to be on a much higher cooldown, but it's going to give you a little bit of a more reliable defensive mechanic that doesn't really put you out of position like the current Sword Evade does. And then Pounce is going to be the new 2-slot skill. We'll see an icon that some people may recognize from the past will be taking the spot of Monarch Sleep. But this is going to be a little bit of a shorter release, but more of that eviscerate type animation, that eviscerate type length. And this is going to be just the primary damage skill of the weapon. It's going to do, a little bit more mobility and a lot of power damage. A couple more updates on this screen that we can see. Increased far-sighted damage, great. And Strider Strength, This is a rework to the sword trait as we're looking to remove the cooldown reduction. We figured that, quickness already doesn't play super well with the sword kit because it has so many mobility skills that aren't affected by quickness. So retooling this into a bit more of just a more potent damage
I wonder if
trait.
that doesn't have a
You're gonna
cooldown.
see, power
The
plus
gain
power
height when
using a
evading an
sword,
attack.
and then might
Because if
to
it
kind of
doesn't,
tie
that's
into that
really good.
evade fluid gameplay mechanic.
Absolutely, yeah. And
On any
we'll,
evade.
we'll show the ranger
Yeah.
sword off in a minute. I think probably after we talk a little bit about this slide, which we will also be showing in game in a moment. So spirits have been reworked. Obviously, previously or currently on live, spirits are the way that ranger gets alacrity. So that is no longer going to be the case. As we said, we're going to be moving that to druid. So spirits are now going to grant an initial effect when summoned. They will then slam the ground for a secondary effect, and then grant boons to nearby allies for a period of time. And so just rework spirits, and again, as we mentioned before, they will now be ranged cast abilities.
Yeah, so we'll show this up on stream, and it's really
I don't know anything about ranger traits.
condensing a lot of the spirit behavior into a bit of a shorter time frame. So spirits aren't gonna be damageable anymore. They're not gonna be
Dodging! Wow,
persist
that's
for
a
a very
really
long
good
time.
trait
We're
already.
showing off
Dodging
on
removes
stream
the
right now. You
damaging
see
and
it
non-damaging
pops in, there's gonna be
conditions, so
an
that
initial
doesn't have a
effect when it
cooldown
pops in, then
anymore.
it's gonna do its nice little ground slam,
That's
do a
really
larger
good.
effect there, and then do
Oh,
a
wow.
little bit of a shake to do that boon application.
That's really
And
good.
then it's gonna go away. So a bit more, condensed into a
Oh
smaller
my
time
God.
period lets us assume it's going to be a bit more reliable.
So we're looking at a ranger meta now?
We're looking at fucking dodge
these
meta,
effects,
excuse
because it's
me,
not going to be
for
something that's just always
everything
on,
now.
always giving some amount of value to nearby players.
That's so good.
And then also probably good to note for this is that Nature's Vengeance is also going to be reworked. So spirits will slam a second time when they finish shaking. And so I'll just, with the Grandmaster, I will just show that off now.
Yep. So obviously not giving alacrity anymore. We are moving that into druid, but we'll get an extra effect, an extra slam. So honestly, a little similar to if people remember way back in the day when spirits
What did you say the slam does? Just
Nature's
an
Vengeance allowed
attack?
spirits to trigger their effect again when they died. It was obviously very problematic, particularly with nature.
So they're more like placeable.
The revived spirit. What's the name of
limited
skills? I don't
turrets.
even know sometimes. Yeah, good times. I just call everything by completely. Good work here on the stream today by me. Yeah, so obviously this gives
He's
you
trying so
the
hard to not get an
second-
angry message
second
later.
Ground slam hit, so giving you a bit more value from spirits.
Not one, but two. There you go.
Very cool. One
That
one
sums
plus
it up.
one equals 2.
Hey, we got it. All right.
Yeah, so there are some other nature magic updates. I think there's going to be even more on the next slide. And the goal here is to really establish nature magic
I'll
as
have
a
to play around
viable
with it,
support
see how
trait line
good it is.
and give it the tools that it needs.
It's such a
Obviously
good
does
change
little
on
bit
the
of
no
that right
longer
now.
cooldown, though.
A lot of the value is tied to alacrity, so we are cleaning up a few of the weaker traits, adding a bit more value.
Okay,
Obviously,
heal,
Windborne
that's
Notes
good.
now is going to heal any ally that you
That's
apply
actually
regeneration
good,
to, not
because
just yourself.
What's weird about I was specking out a
And
druid, and they
then,
don't really have a
Invigorating
support trait line.
Bond, now
Like, they
going to
have
trigger
one,
off
and
your
then they
own
don't
healing
have a second
power,
one.
give some boons, make that a much more reliable healing option if you're not looking for the extra spirit trigger. That's the much
Ranger's going to be a very
obvious support grandmaster trait.
appealing pick.
No, there's the
Honestly.
Nature's Vengeance note, which we already talked about. So
Nature's
moving
Vengeance.
On. Trapper's Expertise, this is going to be the first of many.
Oh,
That's
thank
nice.
God.
I haven't seen
which is that the trait no longer
druids
uses cooldown
in
trap
PvE
skills,
in a
and
while.
roll that in
Well, the
baseline
reason I would
healing
take it on
spring
Harvest
and
Temple, but the reason I
Spike
can't
Trap.
is I can't
Spike
stealth
Trap
the
notably
spirits.
is PvE only for that cooldown reduction.
And I can't unsummon them, but this completely gets rid of that.
And then same.
They just,
same
dude, these
thing,
are
again,
important
great.
changes. Stop
we're
going
gonna
so
see this quite a
fast.
bit. So shout trait.
Yeah, we
Roll them in
probably
baseline.
won't need every single note on every single page of all these cooldown reductions, but I mean, obviously,
No, come back.
you guys can all read in the chat, and they'll be posted again after the stream.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
They'll all be on
Okay,
the
well,
Grace
forum.
how's
of the
it gonna-
land.
Yeah,
How's
That's
it
a
gonna give
cool,
might?
cool change.
Here it is, Druid Grace of the Land. Yeah, I think maybe I even saw someone mentioning this in Twitch chat right before we started. But Grace of the Land is now going to
Okay,
be
they
the
just
alacrity
rolled it
trait
in.
for Ranger, obviously tied in specifically to Druid. So Druid will be the alacrity source on Ranger now that we have removed it from Spirits.
That's
And
great.
that is just going to
Increased Astro Force by like a bunch in
and
PvE.
I believe that is game wide. Correct me if
That
I'm
is
wrong.
game wide, and we can
Game-wide.
also see here that rejuvenated tides and natural convergence, these are getting some might.
Cosmic
rolled
Ray is
in
huge now.
baseline. You won't have to take any trait to get this might. And this is kind of a nod to making sure that support druids still have
I guess I'm
a
running
reasonable
the
amount of might. And
Druid for
obviously
Harvest
Grace of the
Temple
Land is going to be
3 weeks.
contributing alacrity. We don't necessarily want to give too much might for free. This is actually a pretty solid amount coming from both
Might be too
natural
much
convergence and rejuvenated tides, but a bit of might baseline is just going to be available to all basically all druid builds now.
Absolutely. A couple other trait changes too. Lingering Light going to be a pretty interesting one that I think should be exciting for some people, which is now that the trait is no longer going to grant increased healing after exiting Celestial Avatar. It will instead reduce the recharge of Celestial Avatar every time another player's healed.
Oh, that's
going to
be horrible for World versus World. I don't want to fight that.
While you're in Celestial Avatar, when you're healing your allies, that will actually reduce the cooldown of being able to go back into
replaces Ancient Seeds.
Important thing to note.
Oh, thank you, God.
Is going to
all right.
The cooldown reduction will.
The stupid immobilized druid thing is going away.
You know, we don't want it to completely blow out.
I'm so happy.
Be a 0-second cooldown every time. So the
oh wait, no, it says if inflict conditions, which maybe maybe that means that they'll inflict immobilize. Damn it.
Yeah, and notably, you know, like this is a cooldown reduction trait, which we're trying to remove from a lot of other areas of the game. This is a case where it kind of makes sense because we really want to give more Celestial Avatar access to support druids specifically. We don't want like just bruiser druids or side node druids or, you know, now DPS druids, now that they're going to be a pretty real thing. We don't necessarily want those builds to have a lower CA cooldown, so tying it to a support trait and making it so that if you are trying to heal allies, as long as you are healing allies, you will have more access to these skills. It's you know, pretty different from just you take this trait, you have cooldown reduction because you have the skill type thing. Yeah. But this is potentially, you know, really interesting in competitive modes as well because you obviously have the choice for Alacrity, but you might not necessarily need it. Lingering Light's going to give you a bit more healing power, and then if you get more CA access, maybe Support Druid starts to be more of a real build. The rest of these changes on this slide are the introduction of DPS Druid.
And I'll show this off in game while you talk about them too.
Show it off in game.
The traits.
And so the goal here is to just, as we said, establish another playstyle for Druid.
Okay, it's only on one of them.
You can only play support Druid, and there's like, you know, some fringe Conti Druid stuff in PvP right now for
really strong.
that's effective in, you know, certain tiers of ranked. But the big changes here are definitely to Eclipse. This is a rework for Ancient Seeds. Ancient Seeds is a trait that we already kind of didn't like. It was kind of an unhealthy mechanic where
I don't want to fight.
It would just create, you know, really frustrating gameplay. And so it felt like the natural place to introduce Eclipse.
Druid side note coming back in style.
Really solidifies DPS Druid as a build. And as we can see here, it causes all of your CA skills to have a Condi component. The notable ones for DPS are going to be damage. We're going to have poison on skill 2 and burning on skill 5. And the other two traits we have with Blood Moon and Natural Balance, these are just additional sources of damage that will hopefully allow both Condi Alac Druid and just straight Condi Druid to be a thing, because Eclipse obviously going to be a good chunk of damage, but you will still be able to take these two damaging traits and Grace of the Land and hopefully be able to
like just no warrior
be
changes.
Pretty close to the usual DPS numbers for a quickness or lack support build.
Indeed. All right. Moving on from Druid.
Yeah, that...
Not quite. There's one more Druid note.
Right. Moving on
Glyph of Alignment getting a little bit of a buff to, again, be another tool for DPS Druid. Got a couple notes for Soulbeast here. One's just very much a QOL usability improvement to Spiritual Reprieve. This is the healing beast skill. If you have a supportive pet, you will have access to this. Just reducing the cast time, reducing the cooldown, making it a little bit more available. And then the larger change here is to Instinctive Engage. This is Dagger 3. It's
impossible to fight against.
Really want to make sure that Dagger is a viable DPS weapon, as a Condi specifically DPS weapon. So we obviously have Condi on the auto attack, Condi on the 2 skill, but the 3 skill only gives quickness right now. Now it is also going to apply notably poison and a little bit of slow, just a little bit of slow to, you know, make sure it is really the poison is the important part, making sure that you have another viable DPS skill to press. And it's not going to be an ammo skill anymore because we feel that the power level is going to be good enough with these changes that it only needs to have 1 charge.
Absolutely. All right, as we mentioned, we are now going to be putting quickness on Untamed. So Let Loose is going to be a new trait. We reworked, or we nerfed Fervent Force previously. So now we're going to be reworking it to Let Loose, which will now grant boons to nearby allies when you use an Unleashed Ambush skill, which will also recharge your Unleashed Ambush when you swap weapons. Notably, I do believe this is going to be different boons in different modes.
Yes, it will be quickness in PvE and not quickness in competitive modes. And yeah, so just a little extra note here. Obviously, Fervent Force has kind of been historically problematic trait. We've seen like the power level of Fervent Force when it was a 4-second cooldown reduction, and really the gameplay that it enabled is, you know, it's really press a lot of buttons as quickly as you possibly can, and it ended up being a bit too rewarding. So we nerfed Fervent Force, and it just kind of fell off the world completely. And realistically, Fervent Force probably just too problematic of a mechanic, too difficult of a mechanic to truly balance and have both in a balanced state and a state that feels good. So while we're looking to introduce Quickness Untamed, this felt like the natural place again to introduce the Let Loose, and it gets a little bit more of that fun, like very bursty potential gameplay because it does refresh Unleash Ambush, so you can ambush, swap weapons, ambush again, potentially create some interesting burst potential. Not quite the same as Fervent Force, but trying to maintain a little bit of that identity while also introducing the quickness.
If they don't nerf chaperones, I'm never fighting a druid in World vs. World again.
A couple other notes here, but again, these will be posted to the forums. We don't need to read through everything, but some other just general buffs there. Same thing, just some power coefficient increases for PvE only. Notably restorative strikes. Did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, with the absence of Fervent Force, we've kind of established a better baseline of where Untamed DPS actually is, assuming you take, like, Ferocious Symbiosis, and it's obviously not up to par. So a lot of these changes are just increasing the potential damage for Untamed builds. The note to Farsighted was actually also a relevant change here. Just a buff to Untamed damage, hoping that that is a viable DPS build in addition to being a viable, quickness DPS build.
Absolutely. All right.
This is the first class, by the way.
And then
we
got
go.
the Thief class now. So, Thief, we're going to be taking a look at acrobatics, trait line.
Hey, my favorite trait line.
Hey, you can talk about this
as much, so that'll be getting some reworks. We've got.
I actually don't mind acrobatics. I think it's fine. I think people just don't take because there's better options.
Deadeye is now going to be providing.
It's redundant
on Thief. We're going to be doing a little bit of a rework for Specter Alacrity, and we did also again mention this in a previous, I believe, forum post. But we are looking at improving Specter's support capabilities.
Yep, and that was definitely part of the teaser. But we're going to kick things off with acrobatics.
Yeah.
So the big change here is the change to endless stamina. And just to give some background, some context, the direction we're going with acro is kind of similar to what we did with Shadow Arts, where previously Shadow Arts was kind of a problematic trait line in how it really rewarded you for camping and stealth and extending stealth durations and creating too much stealth.
In response,
and when we reworked it, we made it more about rewarding stealth. So you no longer got the stealth extension, but you got some really powerful effects on entering.
Oh man, good luck locking down a
really promoting that gameplay, gameplay style. Similar to acrobatics, we've seen, historically when acrobatics has been a viable trait line in the past with the super vigor trait, and way back when feline grace gave you flat endurance, we saw some crazy stuff with just acrobatics gave you way too many dodges, and it was very hard to interact with, very hard to kill in Acro Thief. So as part of our kind of look at acro and our acro rework, we want to focus more on rewarding dodges more so than giving a bunch of dodges. And feline grace will still grant vigor, but endless stamina is no longer going to be that super vigor trait. And we really wanted to add another damage trait to the Grandmaster Minor. This is something that did exist previously, Fluid Strikes. This is the old name. It's a different behavior, but it is now once again
what if Thief's taking a
damage add in the Grandmaster Minor.
I think the
normal for Thief,
Deadly Arts, whatever the
trait line.
DPS one is.
And something that is really maybe not a requirement, but a very strong incentive to use a trait line. So with acro now having that, and we'll still have Swindler's Equilibrium giving it more damage to sword builds as well, it makes it just a much more attractive trait line. And with that, we're hoping to see some acrobatics Thief, probably with sword builds, maybe some staff builds. We'll really see how it goes.
It is awesome.
The damage bonus here is quite good. What?
I said SD stocks.
I think it's awesome, hopefully without being too OP.
Of course.
Indeed.
Like
a couple
other
notes there were just to
hard to kill.
Reworking some of the more passive
that's even more Condy Cleanse on dodge, where the Daredevil already has the one whenever the evade attacks, so now it's dodge and evade and attack. And if you took like antitoxin runes on top of that, you'd just be immune to conditions.
Guardian Initiation, pretty exciting one here. We're going to be giving resistance on movement skill, so that replaces a trait that would cleanse stuff like some non-damage when you struck an enemy. Not really exciting, not really interesting. Now it is both exciting and interesting, I would argue.
All right, can't say no to getting excited about resistance. Absolutely. All right, a couple other changes here. Improvisation going to be
trigger.
kind of important one. Also potentially tie in a little bit to
Which one's
some
Swindler's?
changes later
Swindler's
on.
Equilibrium?
But this
Whenever
is
you
going
an
to
evade
be
attack?
now reducing the cooldown of all utility skills by percentage when you steal instead of a random skill, where normally or live right now, if when you steal, it randomly recharges a random skill. And so this is just to kind of reduce the RNG a little bit, make it a little bit more consistent. And like I mentioned, and a bit with some other changes we'll be doing or showing in just a moment.
So maybe you don't need a sword or spear anymore?
Some other minor updates to acrobatics traits, tuning them up a little bit. Swindler's Equilibrium, we are going back to the old functionality of the 1 second recharge.
Oh, finally, they're fixing improvisation and not be random.
On a single trigger with a long cooldown. And this felt like it's just a bit more...
That's like really good.
Identifies a bit better with the acrobatics trait line, where you are going to be focused on those maybe a little bit longer encounters, dodging, just that fluid gameplay. You'll be dodging a lot more frequently, so rewarding like each time you dodge is a bit more acrobatics than giving you a single reward one time every longer interval.
I'm scared.
Yeah, Daredevil.
Yeah, Daredevil.
Got some buffs.
As we mentioned, we're going to be looking at buffing it a little bit in PvE, so we've just got some straight-up staff DPS coefficient increases there for PvE only.
You're worried about
detonate
plasma granting quickness,
stolen skills. So in PvE, Daredevil, it's very strong in some bosses, not so strong on others, just kind of based
goodbye,
on
plasma.
a lot of these stolen skills that you can get. So we're kind of trying to just kind of close the gap.
I think they're just trying to streamline it, so it's like, oh, you can't just only take Daredevil on this one boss.
Plasma now deals damage and no longer grants quickness, and obviously, again, we are going to be putting quickness on Deadeye, so we didn't want Daredevil to have that ability to grant quickness. And then a couple other changes to some other stolen skills.
Yep, as Roy said,
I don't know
really just
any
trying to
of
normalize
these. These are all the boss steal stuff.
Regardless of what stolen bundle you get, you'll be dealing about the same amount of damage, because we are also increasing, the staff damage increases. We just want to make sure that Daredevil feels good on every encounter, not really reliant on RNG or in specific encounters to actually play DPS Daredevil.
I don't know, with the way the dodges work, I'm not sure if Daredevil ever feels good in PvE encounters.
Again, we see just,
compared to stuff now, right?
Tenacity, no longer reducing cooldown physical skills, and almost all of the physical skills.
There's just so many good power specs on Thief that it seems weird to rely on the one that has such weird dodges.
Especially when you need to dodge around the boss to do damage.
Deadeye.
Here we go.
Yep.
This is the big one.
No, I think Slade likes it. I could be wrong.
All right, if you want to talk about it, I can show it in game.
Sure. Yeah. So the big change here is that we are trying to introduce quickness Deadeye, and a big part of that is stolen skills will now grant their beneficial effects AOE. This is notable for steal time, because steal time gives quickness.
Oh, that's World vs. World too, probably.
The other piece of that is the change to Fire for Effect, which is the trait that currently gives you some might, gives you some fury. It will still do that, but it will now also cause you to always steal time. Which means regardless of the enemy's profession or creature type, you will
that's really strong if that's ever game mode.
Which means you can now consistently grant AoE quickness to
He's
yourself
in the PvE lobby, so PvP lobby, so he's
the expectation here.
Now quickness Deadeye.
Theorycrafted the build a little bit internally as well.
Are you ready to get bursted in every PvP match forever?
This because it gives you
I hate when Deadeye is good in PvP.
Take away a bit from the damage, but it will give you
at least it's not 1500 range anymore.
A bit, so obviously we want quickness Deadeye to be a similar DPS value to other quickness builds. One in the chamber obviously is a relevant trait here because it will refresh your stolen bundle, but at the same time we don't want this to become a build where you just must press all your cantrips on cooldown in order to maintain quickness. That's gameplay that we're trying to get away from, so we don't want to introduce that while we're fixing all these other cases. We're expecting that you'll probably play this trait. You might take a cantrip or two to bridge the gap of...
quickness Deadeye and PvP is a horrible combination of words.
You want quickness access at very specific times, then cantrips will
time to take Roy test 4 on live.
But there's no expectation here that you will have to take 4 or 5 cantrips and just press them in order to get quickness to your party. So Roy is showing this off a little bit in game, how he always steals time. Very exciting.
Indeed, it is stealing time.
Very interesting.
Oh,
I like it.
What
do you think?
A couple of other improvements.
We'll see.
Not for PvP, but I like it for
PvE. No, it's great for Deadeye, but for PvP, it's scary.
And then some cantrip improvements.
It wasn't a lot of quickness, to be fair.
All of these cantrips. but there are definitely
Yeah,
some,
but it is
some
only the
gameplay
initial
improvements
burst
that
that's
folks
scary
I
in
know.
Deadeye in the
like
first place.
Shadow
Yeah.
Flare, making it a bit more reliable, a little bit less.
Especially if you can give it to your allies, like stealth them all,
Non-synergistic with
initial
stealth.
burst.
It'll just do a single hit
gauge
now,
fight.
as opposed to pulsing and really disrupting any stealth gameplay that you might be
Yeah,
looking for.
that has got to do something.
But really nothing
See.
too crazy.
Indeed. All right, moving on. Specter. So again, as we mentioned at the beginning of the Thief slides, we are going to, well, a couple things. One, we did tease, and Cal mentioned it a little bit when we looked over at the teaser, but we also are going to be relooking at how Alacrity is going on Specter. So we'll show both those things off. But yeah, first off, ally targeted scepter skills now also grant a lesser effect to allies in a radius around the target. So obviously,
Good.
you know, Specter, very, very potent at supporting a single ally right now, and that's great, but we still want to make it viable in modes, you know, where you have more players that you're trying to support, you know, looking a lot at world versus world, instance content, in some cases PvP as well. And so also probably
Second
important to
opinion.
note here
I
is
like
that
that.
the lesser effect is going to be different between
I didn't
game
realize
modes.
that
So in
trade
some
was
game
called
modes
that.
it might be a little bit higher, some game modes it might be a little bit lower. But yes, your ally targeted scepter skills now will be granting their bonuses to allies around them, around your target.
Yeah, and it's at a lesser effect because we still wanted to maintain a little bit of that single target identity. That's like a lot of what Spectre is
What
trying
class
to
do you
do.
think will be next?
Those 2v2 situations or those the protect the king
they usually have an order?
situations. We still want that to
I feel like
feel
they usually
like
do
those
it by
are-
weight,
they're-
but they're
they're
just kind of
possible
going with
Spectre.
whatever. Like what they.
So
Mirage will be next.
Doing just a little bit of a
Whatever has to be.
splash of the effect around the
That's what they
target as
showed
opposed
off.
to doing the full value for all targets is our attempt to really maintain that identity. Obviously, Shade Step is going to just kind of apply to everyone.
Is that
because
was
there's a
that the
full
only
rework.
main
We felt
heal
this trait
power trade on Spectre?
maybe wasn't the most reliable, a little bit clunky
Not
gameplay
sure.
wise, and as we're
I
looking
mean,
to
it's just healing.
introduce
Cares about
Alacrity
healing
on something
power.
else for Specter
It doesn't
and really
like healing as
solidify
Black
that
Hat
support
mentioned.
build.
Healing power doesn't do
decided
much
that
for the
reworking
build
Shade
because it
Step
doesn't
was
actually heal. It
probably
just
the
like
thing that made the most
provides
sense.
barrier.
So it's now
And that
going to
scales off of how
essentially
long
make
it spends
your
in
Shadow
Shroud.
Shroud skills AoE
I'm gonna
because they're going
sneeze.
to apply to allies around the tethered target. And the boon here is different per game mode. It's going to be Alacrity in PvE, but then Protection as a
Excuse me.
different way to support your allies. In
It's interesting that
competitive
they're really making defined
And, you know,
changes
for
now.
rounding out the
so that you-
changes,
if something gives Alacrity in PvE, it doesn't
reworks to
necessarily
traits,
give it world
obviously,
versus
well trait
world.
won't give Alacrity
You know?
anymore, and Shallow Grave
Yeah.
a little bit more.
Because that
condition
Tempest
removal.
trait that gives Alacrity is already really
Really,
strong. So
nothing
maybe
too
they
crazy.
can
Let's
give
see how many
Warrior
times I can say
Alacrity in the
nothing too
future.
crazy in this stream.
Because my big
So
question is
nothing
like, how do they give Warrior
in
Alacrity
the
without nerfing Defiance
underground
stance?
preview streams.
Ever.
So here just showing off the new Grandmaster there. This is notably protection in PvP, but it will be Alacrity in PvE. World versus World, it will
Okay,
also
so
be
Deadeye
protection.
gets
So
quickness
the
in PvP, but
competitive modes
Spectre
are
doesn't
aligned
get
there,
Alacrity.
and then, yeah, in
I'm okay
PvE
with
it'll
that.
be Alacrity. And if I had some allied targets to show this off on, I would.
Give it to the
Unfortunately, I don't.
Trebuchets.
And so we will move
Oh, what happened?
Clearly,
to
Roy
those?
doesn't world
I
versus world.
literally
He doesn't know
spawned
you
some
can give
gold
Alacrity to
for
the map
Trebuchets.
list.
purposes. Oh, nice.
So we've been bamboozled by map closing, unfortunately.
Or
Good times.
But it
protection.
will essentially work as you might expect when you use Shroud skills or ally or Scepter skills. It will grant the boons
suppose
around your
boons,
target,
yeah.
or
Sorry.
in the case of the Shroud skills, it'll grant your allies protection if you're in PvP or World versus World, or Alacrity in PvE. There we go. And yeah, I don't know if we can blame Trig for the map closing, but we could certainly try.
I think we can't. Wait, I'm still on the map.
Oh,
That's okay.
that's okay.
I guess we can blame Roy for not understanding how to
That
do
doesn't make any
things
sense.
on
You said-
the dev
Now
plan.
Cause
causes
not
siphon to
blaming this
transfer
stream, but
conditions
okay.
to tethered enemy.
Let's move
Alright.
on.
I don't want to
Let's
fight
move on.
that.
Shame
Do you want to
on
fight
them.
that?
Engineer. So a couple things
Go
here
back.
for Engineer.
Nope.
We're going to be looking at the outer range penalty on
Oh,
Mechanist, which
God.
we've, done a couple of tweaks to already, but we're going to be
The
looking at
problem
it
with
again.
all of this is
And
I'm
then we
really
got a
excited, but I know the
rework
warrior changes are
for
going to be like
Scrapper that we're gonna
increased
be doing,
damage by
along
0.1.
with, several other changes.
Again, similar stuff. Moving it off of welds, moving it off of gyros,
Yeah,
moving it
but
into freeing up those utility skills.
first up, we've got a couple of sort
Interesting.
of general changes. Couple that I'll just note here. So Med Blaster, this is going to be Medkit 1, is going
Skill
to
is now
nerf. Range is
unblockable.
going
I
down a little
love
bit,
it.
and the number of boons that this scales
That's
off is going
actually
to be
big.
World vs. World and PvP. However, Fumigate is going to have its cooldown reduced in World vs. World. And Super
Elixir
Elixir is
gun
going
buffs.
to now be sort of more normalized with the PvE values. It's going to not pulse for quite as long, so that
I feel
you
like I
don't
should
sort
be
of have
playing
to
music
stay in
while
that
they're
AoE
talking.
to try to get the full value from it. And because of this, we've increased the ticks and the
maybe
healing
people
on it
just wanna listen
just
to
to
them
make sure
talk.
you're still getting that value while you're in it. And so a little bit, these changes are kind of aimed at trying to bump up support Scrapper a little bit in World versus World. Notably, I guess I should also mention Super Elixir is going to be unblockable. And so, we nerfed support Scrapper back in October pretty heavily. It was a build that was running pretty rampant in World versus World support Scrapper for quite a while. And we have seen it still somewhat around a little bit kind of on the fringe, but we want to try and bump it up a little bit just to try to compete with some of the other supports that we've seen getting a lot more value in World versus World recently. All right. Some toolkit updates. I believe you're muted, Cal. I don't know if you'd like to stay that way for the rest of the stream.
Thank you.
We could try to read their lips.
Probably make things easier for me. Just sit here and let you do everything.
I'll
Which is
try.
basically what we do right now. You're running the whole stream. Anyway, Power Wrench not going to reduce the cooldown of toolkit skills.
Oh, I did it.
Anymore. This trait would definitely be one of the weaker ones especially in competitive.
Wait,
modes,
what?
as the recharge reduction.
Wait, what?
1 second.
Are you
long
reading
time ago.
that?
So bringing that back up to 3
Yeah.
seconds
So
is
Power
gonna be
Wrench
for-
right now, whenever they
potentially makes
dodge,
it
they
a bit
reduce the
more
cooldown
interesting.
of an elite skill by
Still
1
has to compete
second.
with
Now it's
some,
going to be 3 seconds again?
Static discharge, a tough
What?
one, but essentially opens the door
Excuse
for
me?
some interesting stuff.
Dodge meta,
That
anyone?
skill.
On everything forever?
Yeah, and then just some PvE only
Nice.
cooldown reductions for some of the
I don't
specific
know how I
skills
feel
there.
about that, man.
And then we've got a CDR
Rocket
trait.
Boots buff, love it.
Indeed. Gadgeteer, excuse me, no longer reduces the cooldown of gadget skills.
But what does it
We've got
do?
Those gadgets, or some of those gadgets, not all of them, of course.
Is the
Getting that
Actual
cooldown
Gadgeteer
baseline.
trait kind of sucks.
There's
PvE
more
is gonna
gadgets
be
on the next
gadgets
slide.
only. Yeah, more gadgets on the next slide. There are more gadgets.
AED's going to have a
And
24
we
second
start the
cooldown
list
no
of
matter what you
elixirs.
do now.
Yeah.
There are many of them.
So hold
Boy.
fast for a couple slides
Oh,
here. We've got some
wow.
elixirs to
God.
look at.
And all the
Yes,
elixirs.
is no longer reducing the cooldown of elixir skills. You now have that cooldown baseline on the elixirs. Just
Although
so
notably not the
unfortunately,
invuln one
the
yet.
Elixir trade all the time.
Okay
going
with
Valkyrie
that.
For that. And something else that's going to be quite
Yeah, that's
nice.
cool.
We'll look at that in just a second. but
Okay, I'm
yeah,
okay with
these-
this if it's
few
not the
slides to get
invuln
through
one.
here.
one or two.
Wait,
for the
I-
elixirs.
Again,
Uh,
these will all be on the forums, so if you miss them for whatever reason, wait long enough on each
What's up?
slide. You can always
Go
go
back.
back and watch the VOD, or you can.
Yeah,
or
well, they just
completely go off
went
the
through
rails
like
here.
all the
Or
elixirs.
again,
so
these
So
instead
they're
of
are
just
just
saying
like
they're rolling the
invuln-
cooldown reduction
That's
from
all
the
we
elixir
posted
trait into
on
all
the
the elixirs,
forums
except
after
for
the stream
the
is over.
invuln one
But
wasn't on
yeah,
there.
so we've gotten through all the
Important
elixirs.
What,
note
what's
here
in
at
Rome
the
one? What
end.
letter is that?
I think
is
it's an S.
that tossed elixirs
Elixirs
that do
small.
not affect enemies are now unblockable. And so this is obviously, again, kind of a little bit of a nod to that support scrapper in World versus World, but in PvP as well.
I like
in
that.
some
Toss
cases,
elixirs that do
where
not
there's
affect
just too much
enemies are now
projectile hate
unblockable.
to
That's
really
really
ever get
good.
value out of those
Because
toss
it's really hard
elixirs.
to get it
while you're
past
trying to
all the
support your
projectile blocks
allies,
in World
again,
versus
not
World.
the ones that affect enemies.
Mhm.
And try to, especially now with the cooldowns coming in baseline with some of these elixirs, we want to see if potentially some of these elixir skills are going to be good on scrapper in a support sort of style, where before maybe you just weren't getting enough value because your toss elixir just kept getting blocked. So that is going to be baseline unblockable.
Toss Elixir B is a pretty good skill.
Yeah, indeed. And now you can play it.
Alright.
Yeah, and then there you go. Cooldowns.
I got some
other traits,
scrapper
yeah.
changes on the next slide, I believe.
Indeed. All right,
Oh, thank
so this
God.
is going to be almost kind of counterintuitive to all the things I just said about support scrapper, because this is in fact a bit of a nerf to support scrapper.
Yeah, more blast and
We
leap
are going to be
finishers. Let's
lowering
go.
the super speed application from speed of synergy in World versus World only. This is not really
Oh, that's
meant
incredible.
to try to
Be nice with
prevent
PvP as
Scrapper
well,
from being able to
although
apply
maybe
super
they already
speed
did it
or
in
to,
PvP,
again,
I
just
haven't
nerf
been
it while
paying
we're
attention.
trying to potentially bump it up a
I
little
know
bit.
they nerfed like
but just
two
because,
irrelevant
again,
things to the
even
scrapper
now,
build that had
while it
nothing
is
to do with
still,
its damage
kind of
output, and then like
prevalent
it
in
fell
World
off the
versus
map.
World, or
I don't know
extra
how
prevalent,
that
I should
worked
say,
in PvP.
and potentially after
was
this
seeing it
patch,
literally
it's
everywhere.
a
Did
little bit stronger.
Yeah.
We
It
just wanna
wasn't
lower
because of
the
its
super speed
survivability or what?
by a
I don't
little
know.
bit,
I think it was just they didn't want it to be able
just
to
because it
cross
can
the entire
currently stack
map
up quite a
itself.
bit.
Sorry,
Notably,
we're
the
talking over
personal
this
super
part,
speed
but
as well going to be taking a little bit of a bigger hit.
they're just saying the same stuff.
As with this trait, you could actually overcap, or not overcap, you could hit the cap of super speed. And so that is going to be lowered a little bit for World vs. World. But some good news for Scrapper enjoyers still. Kinetic Accelerators is going to be reworked, which is now going to be applying boons to nearby allies when you successfully combo with a blast or a leap finisher. Your function gyro also becomes a blast finisher. And this is obviously very cool. Some nice sort of new tech there for Scrapper. And I don't quite recall if the boons are going to be the same game wide. Cal, you can.
So it'll
Watch
be
there be
quickness
no
in
warrior
PvE
slide.
and might and fury in competitive modes. Basically, the boons that are already on kinetic accelerators are going to be the same.
Not
The
important enough
durations
to
might
talk
be
about
adjusted a little
stream.
bit.
No,
But
there's just
the trigger
0
condition
warrior
is what
changes.
changes here. And again, this is going to really open the door for a lot of different utility skill choices.
I gotta play more
for
stuff, man, so I don't
quick
just
scrapper,
complain about warrior
because,
all the
you know,
time.
NG has a lot of different blast relief finishers.
Maybe I will now that
Obviously, if you have
Mirage is
hammer,
like,
you're already leaping
getting
twice
some
with
changes. Who knows?
hammer 3. And then you can, there's a lot of different choices.
What do you mean?
in these
Warrior's
skills
only
to
class in
access
Guildwars
to
too.
more blast
I
and relief
wish.
finishers. And obviously, they're also going to have tool belt
36
skills.
different
There's
flavors
going to be
of
a lot
warrior,
more
let's go.
flexibility in how these builds exist.
Absolutely. Indeed. All right, looking at Mechanist. So the big one here, obviously, is going to be Mechanical Genius, which is currently the way that sort of, you're meant to play around your mech.
Oh, thank God.
Right now, if you're out of range of it, it has that
Good
stat
rework to
reduction.
Mechanical Genius.
We
Saltier
still
will hate
want
it.
you to have to play around keeping your mech within range, but we felt the stat penalty was maybe a little bit too punishing. So you're no longer going to have that stat penalty on your mech. Instead, now it'll just increase the cooldown of command skills if the mech is, or if you use those command skills while the mech is farther than 360 units away from the engineer.
That's a big healing power buff.
Yeah, so this is both a little bit more.
So does that fix
visible.
issues
It's a
you're
lot
having
easier to
with tethering the
understand
mech
that
correctly?
you
No,
press your
it still
button while your
tethers
mech
at
is out of
1500
range,
because
and it
like reasons. Even though
has a
its
higher
ranger's
cooldown as
5000,
opposed
but
to
it'll
this, almost this pseudo-invisible
Yeah,
like
it's
stat
Eminem,
penalty
sort
for
of.
mech. I feel like it's just going to be a lot more,
yeah, he's like
a
saying
lot
it now.
better, a lot easier to understand with this penalty. And we still, as Roy said, we still want to have some sort of penalty to not staying too close to your mech, but we're hoping that this iteration
Basically,
feels
it just
better
makes
than
the
before.
alacrity application smoother.
And we have a couple other changes to Mechanist
That's nice.
with maybe some barrier reductions on barrier engine, a bit too
Maybe.
easy of a source. So we see the barrier coming down there, but then barrier burst getting a bit more barrier on it to compensate.
So they want it to be less like
Indeed.
autopilot
All
on
right.
mech support.
1/3 of the
Actually
way
press
through.
your buttons.
So we've got Guardian now to talk about.
Dang, I was wrong. It's not
and
meant
That's
so,
good to hear.
Honestly, a chunk of these notes are going to be utility skill cooldown reduction traits being removed and the cooldowns being baked in baseline, just because Guardian had so many of them. So it is going to be a lot of notes, not necessarily a lot of different sort of mechanical changes there, but this will affect a large variety of Guardian builds. And then on top of that, we've also got some improvements for Firebrand in PvP.
Yeah, I believe there's 7 utility skill traits getting adjusted here, but they're potentially, create a lot of interesting options, because especially the meditation trait and the shout trait are 2 of these, fairly iconic traits that Guardian builds have been more reliant on historically in order to
How
play
ready
stuff
for you,
like,
or how ready are
stand
you
your
for
ground
more
is very
mobile
much balanced
Guardians?
around having pure voice right now. So
Oh,
you can get
lovely.
penalized a little bit if you do not have pure voice, but now you might have a little bit more
We'll see if
freedom
they
to take
actually,
something like force of will and
Roll it into judges or not.
the meditation
That's a
trait.
big
All
one.
of the meditations
That's
are
a
going to get their
huge
cooldown reduced.
cooldown reduction for
So
Bane Signet.
much more flexibility in what trait lines you can play while you're playing.
That's
meditation.
huge.
Obviously, we have the Signet
That's
trait
a
here
lot
up
of
on
reduction.
the slide first. The most exciting change from this list is probably going to be Signet of Resolve, getting a pretty significant cooldown reduction, going down from 35 to 25 in competitive modes. So we've also reduced the healing a little bit, just to 25-second cooldown.
That's the
is
healing Signet.
Not
That
too
healing
long for a
signet
healing skill,
heals for
pretty-
used to heal
pretty
for
normal,
a
so
ton,
having still an
so
8.1
It still
it's
does.
probably
that's
fine.
probably a bit too high.
But it removes
reducing
conditions
that
every 5
cooldown,
seconds. I
reducing
don't
that
think it's
healing skill,
like if I was playing
reducing that
Willbender, I
healing
would take
value,
that already.
Makes this a much more attractive
Willbender's
healing
heal
skill.
skill
Yeah, I
sucks.
don't. That heal skill
And
is
you'd see
way
Eternal
less utilized
Armory,
than I think it
same
should be.
thing.
I think it'll be
reduced the
utilized
cooldown on
now.
Truth and Hammer of Wisdom. Just those 2, and then Monk's Focus is now again, as Cal mentioned, no longer going to reduce the cooldown of meditation skills. We have bumped up the healing by a little bit in PvP and World versus World, just to kind of help with some.
It's
some
interesting
Guardian
that a lot of
DPS
these
builds,
cooldown
in
reduction
case you're
traits,
still
they're just
trying
pulling
to
the
take this
cooldown
trait,
reduction off and just
after
leaving the
cooldown
other
is no
effect,
longer
which is
on
kind
it.
of like weak
Just
in
giving
a
you
lot
little
of
bit extra
places for like a
sustain.
Grandmaster,
But, as Cal mentioned, I mean, this is obviously going to be fairly relevant for.
So
a
I
couple
guess they're sort
builds
of bringing
in
down the
big
power
PvP
of those
specifically, where
Grandmasters
you
in that
already
way.
take several meditations. All of them,
Judges,
except for, I
there it
believe,
is.
Focus, are getting.
Are they
their
just
cooldowns
leaving them
baseline.
as is without the
Difference there
cooldown?
for Litany Wrath to heal.
It
the
looks
rest of
like
them,
it for a lot of them.
this,
Like most
again,
focus, they're like, oh, we're increasing the healing a
kind of,
little bit, but
not to beat a dead horse, it is
pretty
going to
much just,
definitely be
you
pretty
know,
relevant
cooldown
for a lot
rolled
of
in
Guardian
for a lot
builds,
of
just
things.
because they run so many of these utilities already. And so now potentially opens up a little bit new build craft. You don't have to go
Contemplation
into
and
Valor, or you don't have to
Judges.
take more focus
Oh.
in that trait line. And then
I'm not
Wow,
ready.
so they're just
Cal
buffing
mentioned
the best
before, their
utilities.
voice Now maybe
Yeah.
Force of Will. And
I mean,
Civil
Guardian's
Light
not
Hands and Hold the
super
Line.
rampant
Those
right
cooldowns
now.
reduced. And I
Old
believe
Bender's
we've
gonna be a
got,
problem.
the other
I'm not ready
shouts
for,
there.
for advance. Look at that.
Sorry?
Not important. Let's keep going.
Okay. But yeah, there
More
we go.
cooldown reduction.
Yeah,
Okay.
more cooldown reduction.
Pretty much all
Indeed.
CDR.
Feel my wrath.
Yet again, another cooldown trait. Who would have thunk it?
That's
Guardian
good.
has
Master of
Only
Consecrations?
40 seconds makes that
Consecration.
usable again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Keep
there's
going.
the consecrations.
Traps.
Traps. Dragon Hunter even has one. So some of the traps are getting their cooldowns rolled in there. More traps getting their cooldowns rolled in there. And then here we come to, I don't know, I think this might be the end of it, finally.
This is the third
after all
class.
that. We've got some specific changes here for Firebrand and PvP. Obviously, the weighty
Trap in
turns
chat.
trait line, or excuse me, trait was reducing the
Wait, no,
cooldown
they did
of
all the mediums, right?
Mantra charge recovery time. That's no longer going to be the case.
Oh, fourth,
We
you're right.
haven't
I
really put
spaced
that
out on
cooldown in
engineer.
baseline, in fact, on any of the mantras. However,
I'm just
if
still
you stick with
focused
this
on the
trait,
Condi
you know,
Druid
currently
thing. My
what'll
my
happen if you
only
take that
criticism
final
of
charge
these
is you'll
notes
get a
so
page
far
back
is if
after
Lunar
removing
Impact,
Firebrand,
which is the Druid
to
3,
use
the big
the
astral
resource
light beam
pages
thing,
in
it already
November.
dazes.
Now
If
it's
it
gonna
also
be
applies
two pages instead of
Immobilize on a
one. So
5
still
second
definitely
cooldown,
a
I'm
pretty
not gonna.
powerful trait
I quit.
that you can play around if you're opting to take it.
Like
And
AoE
then
daze
notably,
Immobilize
the
on Lunar
cleanse
Impact,
mantra
dude.
there for PvP is going to be getting some
No.
changes. Right now,
second
it's
cooldown?
not
No.
really very strong at one cleanse per charge.
I'm a Druid main
and
now,
kind
man.
of all of the cleanses baked into that third and final charge.
Yeah, the
where it
only
cleanses
way to
5.
roam.
We wanted
Just
to be able
Selly
to allow
Druid
players
main.
to play around, the other two charges
Perpetual
a little bit more. Maybe
scumness.
potentially that'll incentivize players to take this this skill. And so now each charge of the first two are going to remove 2 conditions. With that, the ammunition recharge is going to go up a little bit as
Come on,
cleanses
last
on
note in
47
this
cooldowns
presentation,
seems a
B,
little
we're
bit
nerfing
strong.
Selly gear.
If it still isn't quite good enough, we are, considering looking at reducing that cooldown back, maybe not quite to 12 seconds, but potentially somewhere in between. And then in sort of reaction to that, the final charge, the third charge, is going to be lowered a little bit from 5 to 3.
I don't know what any of this means. I
These
don't
are
play
pretty-
Firebrand PvP.
So obviously
I'm
this is
assuming
like the
it's good.
only this is the only true Firebrand note. Honestly, it should be pretty relevant having that more reliable cleanse. And obviously, if 18 seconds is too high, as Roy said, we'll be kind of evaluating to make sure that
Yeah, I think
You know,
this,
this is
definitely
one-
buffs
this is one
the
of the
support of
most
it again.
I'm glad
potent,
it's not like,
support Firebrand
oh, we made all of
skills
its
that is good
abilities
with
like
Firebrand, having that access to
360
more
radius
reliable
bigger or
cleanse.
whatever, you know?
We do
'Cause I
think
think
that
that was
like
kind
the
of the issue with
change to
P-
Pure Voice
Path
is
of
going to give a
Fire,
lot more
where, like you
flexibility to
said, you could
Firebrand
just
because you are
drop a
players still
shade
going to
or a
want to play
Firebrand
stand your
on the
ground.
node and never
Now
lose
you'll be
it.
able to more freely play
Yeah,
with
it was
Force of
just
Will,
so
which will
overtuned
make,
because you had a Scourge and a Firebrand, you were
a little
unstoppable.
bit more tankiness should help.
And they
obviously
nerfed
increase outgoing
the
healing.
support on Firebrand
It's going
hard
to
because of
be,
it, but I guess it
honestly,
finally
a
gets to
non-trivial
come
improvement
out
to
of
Firebrand
come out
builds,
of nap
and
time a bit.
it still might
We'll see
not
if
get
it
here.
overtakes
I
Core
think
Guardian,
Firebrand
because
is the
we
new
saw a
Shatterstone.
couple
Now
when
that,
we were
now that
queuing, they were
Shatterstone
pretty
is a
good.
real skill and we can't buff it every patch anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's
We're
funny
now
to me
going to
because I don't
buff
think Core
support Firebrand
Guard
every
ever really
other
got
patch.
bad. It's just
It
everything
took a
else
while
overshadowed it.
for us to land
It's also
on what
funny
we
that
wanted
Guardian
to
has like
replace
basically
Shatterstone
3
with.
support traits
We
or
ended
trait
up
lines that it
landing
can
on
take.
support Firebrand
No?
since we'd already
I'm
kind
just
of
on
Yeah.
base. I
done
guess
some
it is
buffs to
Guardian.
it the last few patches. We figured why not keep going.
Yeah, it
So
deserves
we'll
it.
see.
I'm
You
glad
know,
they still exist.
Yeah,
Shatterstone took some time, but yeah.
we're still iterating.
Yeah.
We do want support Firebrand to be a real build in PvP,
I
and
do want it to be a real build.
I feel like it's
that.
definitely getting closer with the changes that have happened over the last few updates. We'll see how these changes really impact it, and we'll probably end up buffing it again in the future patch.
Probably
Absolutely.
end up buffing it again. I like
All
that they
right.
said there will
We've
be
now
future
gone
patches.
to Revenant.
That's my
So
favorite thing
Revenant's
so
gonna
far.
have sort of 2 big notes here, which is
Yeah,
that
because
Increased
Trap
Herald
DH
is going
seems to
be getting a
be
bit of a rework.
almost like
And
good
we are
enough
going to be
right
adjusting
now.
Vindicator for Warriors as
Maybe.
well,
I mean, against
specifically.
certain things, maybe. I guess everything's good against certain things.
So a little bit of a nod to, well, a couple of different things, mostly competitive stuff here, which is going to be that Banish Enchantment is now getting a 5-second cooldown in World versus World. This is mostly due to sort of
Really?
2 things. One, which is when you go into Malix, especially with Charged Mists, you can very easily spam Banish Enchantment.
Yes,
3
it
times
is,
in a
and
row,
that's why
which
it was
whips a
good.
large
That
number of damage
sucks.
from targets very, very quickly. We felt that it was just a little bit too spammable. It also kind of
What?
locks players out of using a lot of other skills. in
Aggressive
Malix,
agility now
so
grants
potentially just opens up some
resistance?
ability just to kind of rotate throughout the stance a little bit more.
So,
instead of
you know
only
that
ever
OP
really
trait
using
on
that
Warrior,
one
where
skill?
they remove immobilize
And then
whenever they
some
use
nice
a movement
changes
skill?
here, some quality of life changes again, maybe a little bit more specifically for PvP.
Yeah.
Obviously, Battle
Yeah.
Scars is literally PvP
Revenant
only,
just has
which is
that
gonna
as
be
well,
that
and
base
it
healing
also
increase
removes
just to
immobilize
increase
whenever they
sustain
use
on some
a
DPS
movement
builds.
skill, but now it
Aggressive
grants
agility is pretty
resistance
interesting change
instead.
here, kind of similar to one of
Dude,
the
why
changes
would
we
you
saw
ever
earlier with
play
Thief,
Warrior?
which is that the trait no longer removes
Pretty much.
immobilize. specialized. This is when you use movement abilities.
God.
Revenant instead will grant resistance. So you're not just kind of.
Hey,
having
I'm
anti-wound trait, you're
glad
now
Revenant
having
didn't
a little
delete
bit more
Thief from the
ability
game
to
and only
potentially
deleted
stop
Warrior. I
some
thought I
of
was
those
going to
damage
delete both of them when it launched.
on
My
Yep.
Forced
and then rounding
engagement
out
going
the
back
stuff
down
on
to
this
one
slide,
target?
Demonic
Really?
Defiance.
That's
just
weird.
Bumping up the power level a bit more. In addition to granting you resistance,
I
it will
like
remove
the
a damaging
multi-chain
condition.
forced engagement.
So we've kind of seen, with the change to resistance going from all conditions to non-damaging conditions, it impacted really the corruption trait line for Rev and also just Malik's.
I guess that does work a little bit better with their
used
kit
to
because
be
a lot of
very powerful against all types of conditions type of trait line and legend, but with the absence of resistance preventing damaging conditions, then damaging conditions are just still very threatening to these builds now, which is maybe not super thematic and a bit punishing to what these builds are trying to do. So this change to Demonic Defiance just trying to give a little bit more cleanse
What is Demonic
to
Defiance?
damaging conditions specifically, because resistance is still there to cover all of the non-damaging components.
Yeah.
And then forced engagement. You want to talk about this one, Roy?
Forced engagement, pretty easy. Yeah, just the range is going back up.
Weird.
We had reduced this a while back, so it's now going to be going to 900, but the number of targets is going to be 5 to 1, so it'll just be a single target ability now. Pretty straightforward there.
Yeah, I mean, we felt it was a bit too powerful, and we did want to bump the range back up because it has a lot more application when you can CC a target from 300 range is not huge, but it is a non-trivial improvement. 600 to 900.
Alex Salvation build with perma protection.
The 5-target nature was probably just a bit too strong, so we really wanted to focus the skill's identity on kind of where it was originally, a forced engagement on a single target at a longer range.
All right, so here is the big thing for Herald, which is, as we mentioned, we're going to be changing
6 or more points of upkeep.
Application on it. So Elevated Compassion will now grant boons to nearby allies while 6 or more points of upkeep are in use, in addition to its current effect. And Draconic Echo no longer grants boons when using Consume skill. Instead, causes passives to grant an additional.
I'm
bonus
sorry,
to
no more
so I'll
quickness,
show
Herald?
these off in game real quick while Cal can do his thing.
So obviously we wanted to move away from the Draconic Echo, press all your skills off cooldown to generate quickness. And moving it on to upkeep was kind of a really interesting idea we had.
Interesting.
And the key here is that we don't want it to be the case where we've kind of moved all the way in the other direction where now you just can't press skills. You must just sit there maintaining upkeep skills and auto attacking. That's definitely not the goal.
Wow, so Sulfur is going to have some stuff to say about this. You're not going to leave.
And the pip requirement has kind of been
maybe
balanced around trying to make sure that players are able to maintain this and still use other skills when they need to, and when they want to, under the assumption that you will be swapping legends to recharge your energy, and there will be some amount of button pressing that can exist alongside this upkeep requirement. Because just to say it again, we definitely don't want this change to be that you sit there channeling an upkeep skill and not doing anything else. And if we didn't quite hit the mark with the durations, we will be adjusting the durations and making sure that gameplay actually works in a way that feels good. Because
one of the first
we want to
bullet
fix
points in this whole
the bad
presentation
gameplay
was
of
bring up
current Draconic Echo, but we don't want to
weapons,
introduce
right?
an additional source of bad gameplay that
Yeah.
make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
There's
So
been
this is
one
something we'll
weapon.
be keeping a pretty close eye on.
Probably important to note in case anyone's confused. Obviously, as I just showed that trait off in game.
I guess they only think it's Ranger Sword and every other weapon's utilized.
Yeah, every other weapon's fine.
Yeah, and then Draconic Echo.
Oh man.
Getting a kind of an interesting update as well, because it's no longer going to grant boons. It still has the facet passives persisting a little bit, but now it's also going to cause those facet passives to have extra bonuses only for the Herald, because we are doing stuff like increased outgoing damage or reduced incoming damage or increased outgoing healing. That might be a little bit problematic if you could apply them to allies, most notably the damaging conditions, the damaging ones, but they will be for the Herald themselves.
Absolutely. All right, Vindicator. So again, kind of looking at support Vindicator in World vs. World.
Oh, thank you God, they're finally nerfing Tree Song 1.5 years later.
But we're just looking to lower it again a little bit. It's still very, very powerful, very, very strong as a support option in World vs. World. So Saint Shield is going to have its
this is balanced
base barrier
now.
Healing reduced a little bit.
So, in case you didn't know, Revenant's
These
weakness has
again,
always
sort of
been the
only
ability to
changes.
cleanse
Tree
conditions,
Song
and
just
they have
going
this
from 5
button
to 3
called Tree
conditions.
Song, which
It's
does everything in the
insanely
game, and then
powerful
heals them
ability.
for like their
Again,
allies
it's
for
kind of similar
every
to
condition they
Malik's, where
cleanse.
you're really only pressing Tree Song a lot of the time.
Yeah,
and that'll
that
like
was why they were
line
so tanky
stance.
in Warvish, right?
And so 5
It was
conditions
one of the
on top
reasons
of
other
everything
than
else it
the
does. Both
Infinity
abilities are
Dodge
strong,
builds,
so
but
it'll be now
yeah.
3.
It's
And
just
then
like,
Untamed
I saw
Victor
that in the
is
beta
going
and
to
I was
kind of
like,
just be
they're gonna
changing
change this,
potentially a
right?
little bit how
And
you
then they
play around
didn't.
the skill as well. Obviously the base healing, or the pulse base healing is going to be going down, but also the upkeep is going to be going from 5 to 7. So you will, while channeling this ability, drain your energy, where before, if you didn't have the other upkeep, you were not draining your energy. And so this is just going to potentially change how Vindicators are using this ability, how they're playing around it a little bit more. Just, potentially see how that changes up support Vindicator in World of World. But just some adjustments there. All right, Warrior, our final heavy class.
Alacrity Bladesworn,
you
fuck
muted
the
still?
fuck off.
Okay, there we go.
Definitely muted. Yeah, I'm
Definitely muted. All
I
right. Well,
don't believe
I'll
you.
read this one anyways. So
Go for it.
Warrior,
Now
we got
there's
some
no way for
exciting
World
stuff for
versus
Warrior.
World.
As you can see, two
There's
things that
no
didn't exist
way.
before are going to be here, which is that Berserker will be given quickness, and Bladesworn will be
You
given
know, Guy
alacrity.
suggested Quickness
We've
Berserker,
also
so he
got a
gets his
couple of
wish.
weapons that maybe don't see quite some use.
Does it
Getting
make
some
sense?
improvements, which is offhand dagger and rifle. So we will be moving on. If I can.
Yeah. So
swap
we're going
that.
to start off with the rifle. The pattern here is we talk about the core stuff first, and then go into elite specs.
Well, this
even
is the
if some of
second
the elite
weapon.
spec stuff is more exciting. Yeah. So let's start off with the rifle changes. So obviously, crack shot no longer going to reduce the cooldown of rifle, longbow,
What
and
does it
harpoon
do
gun
then? 'Cause
skills.
that's all it does.
We will see some cooldown adjustments to longbow on the next slide, but first let's talk about rifle. So
Oh,
what's
just
the big change
fix
here?
longbow.
We see a couple of damage improvements, some cooldown reductions, but also the big change here is that the recharge time between uses is going to be 1 second. And this is currently a variable number across all the skills. There's some that are like 5 seconds, brutal shot is 8 seconds, and it really prevents players from really utilizing one of the most powerful things that ammo bring to the table is the opportunity
we were already
to really
seeing
burst,
power
get a
nuke
lot of burst
berserkers in
value. So you
PvP.
can now press volley and then press volley again, get a lot of damage, or you can press brutal shot, evade, brutal shot again to evade. And it's really going to make the gameplay a bit more fluid, where you're always going to have access to the second charge of a skill when you want it, because the recharge time is only going to be 1 second between those uses. Like I said, just some damage adjustments. We are trying to make Explosive Shell a bit more potent in competitive modes on the damage side. So we see the cripple duration coming down, in addition to while the cooldown is coming down and the damage is going up, the cripple duration is coming down, because a 5-second cripple on an 8-second cooldown that does a decent chunk of damage is maybe a bit too overpowered.
Maybe a little bit.
But the next slide will actually have one of the most exciting changes for rifle, which is brutal shot. We've kind of we've adjusted how the skill sequences things, because obviously anyone who's played the skill right now will know that you have to do the shot, immobilize your target, and then only then can you actually evade. So it's very unresponsive to actually use as a defensive skill.
No more burning on auto attack on
It does
longbow,
potentially
period.
hold rifle back pretty
That's
significantly. So now the way the skill is going to work is that it will immediately roll and evade when you press the button, and then once the
I almost
evade
want to pause the
finishes,
stream
it will
for this.
do the immobilizing shot.
Dear arenanet, if you're
So
listening,
again,
the problem with
much more
longbow
responsive,
is
much
not the
more useful
cooldown
as a defensive
reduction.
skill.
The
And
problem
with that 1
is
second
all of
cooldown
the
between
skills
uses,
suck.
potentially a lot of defensive value for warrior.
The projectiles are the slowest things in the game.
Here's
It
the
needs a
longbow
rework.
reduction.
cooldown
Thank
reduction,
you.
Cal mentioned.
A
Obviously,
rare
just-
sight on the stream.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
obviously sort of response to the trait changing. But moving forward, this is a pretty interesting one we've got here. So Flurry is now going to allow you to move while channeling it. And we are going to be changing it as well, just to be a little bit more responsive, so that the overall hits and animation time go down lower, as well as the power coefficient per hit going up. And so just pretty interesting change there for Flurry. Now you can move while casting it. That's, there you go. And
Very
then
cool.
moving forward, so we are removing quickness from baseline warrior mostly. Doubled standards will no longer grant quickness. That's everywhere. That's going to be resolution instead. But very importantly, Marshall's Cadence, which is the Grandmaster in
You do not care
tactics,
about
will
warrior
still
at
give
all.
quickness in PvP and World versus World. We felt that obviously we're giving quickness to Berserker. We don't really feel as though support Berserker is something that we're going to see in World versus World PvP, and so kind of allowing the ability to still grant quickness on what we see a lot is support Spellbreaker in these game modes. It's a build style that we like. Quickness is pretty important for that build to be existing, so we didn't want to remove it from those game modes. PvE, however, that trait will now be granting stability, because obviously you could very easily take tactics and still do a lot of damage on Quickness Berserker in PvE, and so we didn't want that interaction to be happening there. Stability is still a pretty powerful boon, so we felt that it was a decent option.
Yeah, why give
and then Soldier's Comfort
anything?
is now also going to grant protection again, sort of looking a little bit at some support Spellbreaker, potentially getting a little bit of buffs there for competitive modes.
Then it wouldn't be called the balance patch.
True.
All right. Some stance cooldown buffs there for PvP, Berserker stance and balance stance. And then we've got the physical skill, or excuse me, physical trait. No longer
Why not world
reducing the
versus
cooldowns.
world?
And we got some of those cooldowns in baseline PvE only for mending. Pulls charge
Got
game
some more
wide.
on the next slide as well.
Yep. Kick, stomp, throw bolas, rampage. That might just be all of them, in fact. Having some cooldowns. And then vigorous shouts, same deal.
Same
No
thing.
longer reducing cooldown of shout cooldowns. So we've got some of those shout cooldowns here. Maybe all of them. Yep, getting those cooldowns down.
Moving on.
What do you know?
Signets.
Another
Wow.
cooldown trait. Signet Mastery, no longer reducing cooldown of Signet skills. Cal's swinging left and right here. And so that's, or maybe Taylor, who knows. That's Signet's
Could be
getting some
anyone.
cooldowns. Could be anyone. Could it be me?
Could
Maybe.
be.
Yeah,
You never know.
probably not. So here we
Could
go.
be, no, I'm not even gonna
Oh
say it.
god damn it!
Berserker, here we go. Berserker getting some reworks. Obviously, Flaming Flurry already allows you to move while casting, so that's just staying the same, but sort of similar treatment with regular Flurry.
Why are they
which is just,
nerfing
again,
Arc Divider?
a little bit more
Why are they
responsive,
nerfing
increasing the
Flaming
cast time
Flurry?
overall, increasing the power coefficient and burn duration.
Because
on
it's
that.
a warrior,
Um,
Kari.
Basically, the burn duration will be split. This increase to 5 seconds is going to be for PvE. I believe in competitive mode, it's only going to be 3 seconds because 5 seconds might be a little crazy.
Yeah. And then kind of a similar deal with Arc Divider, which is that it'll just do one hit there. Again, just to kind of try to make it a little bit more consistent.
So
just
you remember when they
casting
changed Arc
time,
Divider to do
the
3
power
hits?
coefficient will be coming down a little bit for PvE.
And now they're changing it back to 1 hit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty significant
Great.
reduction in PvE, but obviously the casting time is going
Also
to
a
be
pretty
over
significant
1
reduction in
second
World
quicker,
versus
so you're
World
gonna be
because the
spending a lot
3-hit
less
Arc
time
Divider
casting the
strips
skill,
ages.
give you a lot more time to use other skills to make up the damage
That's
loss.
horrible.
We're hoping that this is not a damage loss. The goal here is that this is just a usability improvement.
Oh my
The overall
God.
damage of Berserker
Fuck
builds
warrior.
in PvE should be about the same, and we'll obviously make additional changes to fix that up if this ends up being too much of a damage loss.
Yeah, absolutely. All
And
right.
obviously, Heat the Soul.
Take it away.
Here's the quickness trait, or boon trait, because it will not be.
Oh, yeah, it's
quickness
gonna
in
be Heat the
competitive
Soul.
modes, But
That's interesting.
whenever you strike an enemy with a burst skill, you will grant to nearby allies. And so the next slide is actually going to have some relevant changes to this as well, because obviously Heat the Soul is a master tier trait, but we felt that all 3 of the Grandmaster traits for Berserker are in a pretty good spot. Obviously, Bloody Roar, great power damage trait.
I'll just
know-
quickly mention before we move on as well that Heat the Soul
Sure.
will trigger off both primal and standard burst skills.
Yes, that is a good note. Yeah, so obviously, all 3 of the Grandmaster traits kind of have their identity. They have their place, and they all feel pretty good. So we felt that the right place to adjust things was with Heat the Soul specifically, and shift some of that, or shift rather all of the Condi damage bonus from that trait into now Blood Reaction will also give Condi damage bonus. We've also bumped up the damage of this trait a little bit as well, just overall, because it has to compete, or it really has to define the damage output of the quickness build. You will be taking Heat the Soul instead of Blood Reaction, so that needs to be a certain amount of damage loss. This is going to, so it's going to be a bit stronger than it is before, and obviously affect condition damage in
It still blows
in
my
addition
mind
to
that
power
warriors
damage.
don't have easy access
And
to
so Bloody
swiftness.
Roar is getting a little bit of a
like,
reduction, but
11
in the
years
same
later.
vein as the Arc Divider change, the goal is that this is approximately the same damage overall for
Yeah, that makes no
DPS builds
sense.
in PvE.
There's
And it's
one
just a
trait
nod
that does
to
it.
Blood Reaction needs to contribute
Meanwhile,
a certain
everything
amount of
around it
damage
gives
so
you
that the
swiftness.
quickness build doesn't do too much damage.
Absolutely.
Move
Our
into Spellbreaker.
Yeah,
Take it
so
away.
Wait, don't tell me if
Some
that's
more sort of world
PvP,
versus
world
world
as
nods
well.
here, which is that Wind's Enchantment is going to have its duration reduced by 1. Break Enchantments is going to have its boons lowered for World vs. World and increased in PvE. And so this is
nerfing
just,
the
again, to
bubble
kind of
again.
reduce a little bit of the potency of boon rip that Spellbreaker has, while it's already doing either a lot of supporting or a lot of damage and CC. And also, specifically
Good
with the Wizard's
Spellbreaker
Disenchantment
changes for people
change,
who run Dagger,
just
I
to
guess.
kind of,
That
when
bubble
winds
nerf's
go down
kinda
a lot of
rough.
the times, groups kind of stop pushing into each other, stop moving. It's kind of a barrier to being able to actually interact, and so we're just kind of trying to reduce that time by a little bit. And then looking at the dagger adjustments, obviously Spellbreaker specific.
Well, I'm excited to play
offhand
Druid.
Dagger,
Are you?
which is Wastrel's Ruin, is now going to be getting boon removal when striking an enemy.
Excited to lose to
And
Druid.
Brainstorm will now grant barrier when striking an enemy. So just some adjustments there, some improvements for offhand dagger.
Yeah, so really, offhand dagger is kind of supposed to be more of like that. It's hard to say because waste.
Did they
Waste
say if
Ruin right now
Alacrity
is just
Druid's
all
gonna be a thing
damage.
in World vs.
But
World?
the goal of these changes is to make offhand dagger a bit more of that utility
Oh, I
focus.
guess you can't take that and the Conde trait.
Offhand, because obviously Bladestorm has the projectile hate.
Aw.
Wastrel's Ruin will now have Boon Rip, very thematic to Spellbreaker. And then adding a little bit of extra barrier just to make it a little bit more, like that utility bruiser hybrid weapon. Just give a little bit of defense so that you feel like you can realistically play dagger offhand and not just instantly die.
All right, and then moving forward, Blade.
No!
Last warrior change.
Last warrior change.
I believe.
The Alacrity.
Ooh,
find
they
out.
got you.
Alacrity Bladesworn.
The only
So
Bladesworn
this is
change?
going to be where you're granting Alacrity on Bladesworn. This has been reworked, the trait. So Dragon Slash is now going to have a lower maximum charge level. It consumes more flow per charge, just so you're not sitting in that Dragon Slash trying to charge up for quite as long while you're, sort of really just trying to apply Alacrity. Its damage per charge is also increased, just to make sure that you're not losing out on that damage. And then it'll grant Alacrity to nearby allies when you complete that Dragon Slash.
Yeah, so we've kind of fudged the damage calculation for Dragon Slash a little bit when you specifically have Daring Dragon, because obviously it reduces your maximum number of charge to 5. And with the current damage equation, the crazy exponential scaling of Dragon Slash, that would be a pretty massive damage reduction to the point that this build would just not be relevant in pretty much anywhere. So we have, as noted, we've increased the initial scaling a little bit when you have Daring Dragon, just to make sure that the damage number is obviously still going to be lower, but it's going to be a bit more reasonable.
I can't play PvP anymore.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to Elementalist.
That's literally it.
All right, we're 2/3 of the way done, Roy.
2/3 of the way
Theoretically.
done. Wow. Theoretically, yeah. Maybe we could slow down. Actually,
Ish.
we're kind of breezing through this. I mean, like I said
I
before,
think Ranger had a bunch of changes.
That's true. You think?
Yeah, maybe a few.
But all right, so
Elementalist.
Let's talk about that. So we've got some damage build improvements for Tempest. We've got some quickness usability improvements for Catalyst. We've got some Weaver improvements specifically.
Wow, they really.
As well as
I guess they looked at Warrior.
Dagger improvements, which we will be showing off in game.
Yep, some really cool stuff. We're actually starting with the dagger improvements.
Cal talk about that, and I will play the game a little bit.
Yeah, so a big piece of these changes
I might quit the game.
Trying to improve the reliability of some of these skills. So Fire Grab, just getting a little bit wider of an attack angle, make it a little easier to hit. It's not going to be huge, but it's going to be just a bit more consistent. There's a lot of times where you press Fire Grab, or at least when I press Fire Grab, when I feel like, oh, how did that miss? I feel like all the LE players in chat right now understand this feeling. So now Fire Grab should be, a bit more consistent with what you'd actually expect. And then Updraft getting a similar change, make the radius a bit larger. It's just a little bit too difficult to hit now. Obviously, we added the delayed knock a long time ago to remove that problematic instant knock gameplay. But the 180 radius maybe a little bit too easy to walk out of. So now 240, meaning that if you position well, space it well, it will be a little bit more required to dodge the skill as opposed to just walking out. And then the big change here is going to be the adjustment to Churning Earth. Some players may not know what this skill does because maybe you don't want to press it. Channel for a long time, sit there unable to move, and then eventually you'll slam the ground. And you might do a lot of damage to someone who dropped their keyboard or their wireless keyboard disconnected for a moment and they were unable to get out of Churning Earth.
Wait, I get hit by Churning Earth all the time.
Oh, that's embarrassing.
What?
But yeah, so Churning Earth may be a little bit hard to use. We have changed it to have a little bit of a movement component, and this really plays into Dagger Offhand's. Part of Dagger Offhand's identity is a lot that a little bit more fluid gameplay, more mobile. We obviously have Ride the Lightning, Updraft, a little bit of skills like that. So Churning Earth is now going to lean into that as well. Do a short little hop, pretty similar to what we've seen on some mace kits in the past, and then slam the ground. So most importantly, the damage will come down a little bit. Obviously, the cast time is going to be significantly lower, so it's going to do less damage. It's also going to be much more reliable. The radius is going to be a little bit smaller because you have that leap component, but it should be a skill that you can reliably at least attempt to hit an enemy with.
Yeah.
And I think it feels pretty good. Playing with it internally, it feels very good.
And then we didn't show us or mention it yet, but obviously Frost Roar and Cleansing Wave having the cooldowns lowered a little bit for PvP.
Microphone activated.
Moving on. So we've got the Glyph trait. This is no longer going to be lowering the cooldown on glyphs. It will grant resistance, though, in addition to the previous effects, and then some of the glyphs getting, or a glyph, excuse me, the heal,
Well, just
getting
one.
its cooldown.
Inscription is a great example of a cooldown reduction trait that never gets played. And it turns out a lot of the glyphs are still good skills and viable skills and good cooldown skills, even without the cooldown reduction trait, so they don't really need to get that cooldown reduction rolled in baseline. Glyph of Elemental Harmony probably is one of them where we do want that, and is at 25 because of the existence of the CDR trait, even if that trait isn't usually taken. We didn't want it to be at 20, and then you take the trait and it goes to 16, potentially a little bit too strong. But now, without that cooldown reduction trait existing, heal glyph down to 20 seconds, potentially another interesting choice.
Yeah.
And similarly, Arcane Brilliance getting a nice little buff here with the cooldown reduction of Elemental Surge going away. That cooldown reduction getting rolled in baseline for PvE and World v World. This skill's actually already a 15-second cooldown in PvP, so we didn't want to bring it down to like 12, but we've just made the skill a bit more reliable, more of the base healing and less of the scaling per strike. So it'll be about the same if you still hit 5 targets, but in those situations where you're only hitting 1 target or hitting no targets, potentially just a much more valuable skill. About a 5k heal.
Microphone activated.
Not too bad for a 15-second cooldown.
Indeed. And then we see a similar state with the Signet skill. Signet trait, which no longer reduces the cooldown. However, it is going to grant an aura to the Elementalist after using a Signet skill. Important note here is that, similar to how a lot of other sort of traits like this function, it's not going to be an aura based on the attunement you're in, but instead it'll be an aura based on the Signet that you use. And we got the cooldowns.
So most of them are pretty straightforward. Signet of Fire gives you Fire Aura. Signet of Air gives you Shocking Aura. Signet of Restoration will also give you Frost Aura, so it'll be 2 Frost Auras. But otherwise, they will have more unique components. And this will actually play in... Sorry, what?
I just bought a lot of Frost Auras.
A lot of Frost Auras. The other... Signet of Earth also getting a slight adjustment to its passive effect, changing it from a flat toughness to just a strike damage reduction. And this is a nod to, endgame PvE, where having toughness on your gear, or having toughness on your utility skills might actually just be trolling your tank. And we do want this to potentially be a relevant piece of Handi Tempest going forward. More to that once we get into the Tempest notes, but this will kind of tie into Written in Stone as a big piece of this. So we see Signet of Fire, Signet of Earth. We brought the cooldown way down on Signet of Earth, hopefully making it a competitive utility slot. We'll really see how that build plays out. We'll talk a bit more about the build once we get to the actual slide. But we do potentially see this as a more viable option, and we can bump up the damage a little bit more if it needs to.
Then Arcane Prowess, good to point out maybe, is that it will
Arcane
now grant
Prowess.
Fury instead of Might in competitive modes.
Yeah, and this is kind of a nod to a long time ago, many years ago, Arcane Prowess was changed from Fury to Might in all game modes, and this was at a time where we didn't really want to split boons like this, and it was kind of a nod to Fury being much more available through other trait lines, and the Might just being a bit more valuable in PvE specifically. But it was a pretty big hit to Ellie in competitive modes, honestly, because when you can't play air trait line, losing access to that Fury and attunement swap is so big for stuff like burning speed combos, or just having Fury in general is so good. And so now that we're a little bit more open to changing the boot on particular effects, this felt like a great spot to bring that Fury back in competitive modes. And once we get over to Catalyst, we'll see that Energized Elements has changed from Fury to Might, because that trait honestly was trying to fill this gap that was previously filled by Arcane Fury, is what the trait was called at the time. But now that Arcane Prowess is now giving Fury, the Catalyst trait will now give Might instead of Fury. So now it'll be accessible to all Elementalist specializations.
Indeed. All right, looking at Tempest and Weaver together. So Tempestuous Aria is now no longer going to cause shouts to inflict weakness. Instead, it'll grant the Tempest a bonus to outgoing damage for a period of time after applying an aura to an ally. So just, again, as we mentioned, trying to maybe prop up some DPS Tempest builds a little bit here with this trait. And then we've got some Sword Weaver buffs here for PvP. Anything you want to...
Yeah, so really, Tempestuous Aria felt... The whole DPS Tempest thing, it felt like there was just one piece missing. Like, if there's just one more damage trait, it would really tie everything together. And Tempestuous Aria felt like the best spot to do it, because it already has that Might component on Shouts. And the weakness, it was kind of thematic that Shouts empowered your allies and weakened your enemies, but we really leaned into the offensive nature of this trait. So Shouts are still going to grant Might to allies, but then adding this aura component for the Tempest themselves, where, obviously Written in Stone is going to play into this now, because when you take Signet of Fire, or if you can take Signet of Earth, or even Signet of Restoration, these are going to be giving you this damage bonus and really just enabling this build, because obviously you're going to have more auras from like Fire
I
Swap
blacked
when you
out.
have
What's
Fire
happening?
Trait Line,
DPS Ellie?
or overloading when you have
Yeah, they're
overload
like
trait that gives
helping
you
Ellie
auras.
for
And
some reason.
potentially- And then Written in Stone for the Condi build, we're expecting like Fresh Air Tempest to potentially be a thing as well, because you'll just get a lot more auras from overloading air over and over and over. And then obviously you still have auras on weapon skills, potentially do some combos. Leap combos can get you some auras. And so we'll obviously be keeping an eye on how this actually plays out in practice, but the expectation is that this bonus will be pretty available to both flavors of DPS Tempest, and it's what's really going to tie these builds together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, a couple more Weaver and Catalyst changes. So Twist of Fate, notably for PvP only, is going to basically kind of get the Shake It Off treatment, which is we've just reduced the ammo count from 2 to 1, so it's just a single charge of this, but the cooldown is coming way down from 75 to 30 seconds. Just make this a little bit easier to kind of play around in PvP, where, if you had to, for some reason, use both charges very quickly, you're now on a 75-second cooldown.
There's only one ammo. Does that mean it doesn't use ammo anymore?
Only, we are going to be changing that.
Yeah.
And then we've got, as Cal mentioned
It won't
before,
count as an ammo skill.
granting Might instead of Fury for competitive modes with that Arcane Prowess change. And then Spectacular Sphere is going to grant quickness. Again, look at that quickness catalyst a little bit. On deploying your Jade Spear in any attunement, in addition to any existing...
That was the evade, right?
It's the stun break on Weaver.
Yep. So this is a nod
Weaver
to
evade stun break thing.
it's basically a usability improvement for quickness
Oh, so that's
catalyst,
pretty
because
solid.
right now all the
That was
quickness
annoying.
obviously comes from Air Sphere. It kind of forces rotations to be in a certain way, and it's maybe not the most fluid to have to play around Air Sphere all the time. So now with it being on any
Wait,
sphere, you just
They're
have a lot
giving
more
Jade Sphere
flexibility,
quickness?
and the quickness duration reduction is just a nod to, well, we want the quickness to be about the same. It's just you get it from more areas instead of just always having to go Air Sphere, Air Sphere, Air Sphere.
Exactly.
All right, moving on. Whoa.
Wow, why?
Necro
Kata did not need a buff. I'm so
Alacrity
confused.
Scourge.
Indeed.
getting one.
Alacrity Scourge. That's,
Coming soon.
Can
to
you
a
tell he
Guild
plays
Wars
Ellie?
team near you.
That's a wild one. And then we've also got some
Alacrity.
rule adjustments for World vs. World. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at
Yeah,
all.
that was coming for a
Or
long time.
until we get to the side.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll might as well say it now instead of talking about it every time we adjust boon rule. Necro, and Scourge, mostly Scourge, but just Necro in general, is a pretty big component of boon rips in World vs. World, in the sense that it has like way more than a lot of other specs. And Spellbreaker gets there a little bit, but much more melee range. And we've talked a lot about the boon rip versus boon application kind of battle in World vs. World. And this is still like something that's ongoing. Obviously, we haven't seen a ton of boon adjustments in this patch, but we are doing a decent number of boon rip adjustments, especially on a lot of the range skills. And the goal here is that, I mean, we are going to keep an eye on this, and we will probably end up producing a lot of boons in a future update. We didn't quite get to all those things for this patch, but the reduction to all of these ranged boon rips is, one, to bring down the number of boon rips overall, because that is part of our goals for World v. World in the long term. And we want the kind of the boon balance to be in a sensible spot. So this particular set of changes might push it a little bit more toward the boons are very good and very prevalent meta, but that also potentially enables pushing just a bit more and getting into those melee fights instead of just camping at range and getting boon ripped at range and not being able to really push in. And so that's really the drive behind a lot of these particular boon rip adjustments. And obviously will be, like I said, this isn't the end of changes to boons for World versus World, but we will be keeping a close eye on like how these changes play out. Does this actually enable pushing? Where are the sources that we need to remove on the boon side of things now that the boon rips are coming down? But we felt like all of the things that we're going to talk about for this update are pretty good adjustments for World v. World as a whole.
Absolutely.
But we'll start with some support stuff. Go for it, Roy.
Absolutely. So, Blood now applies regen every pulse. Ritual Life, reduced revive percentage in PvE only. Life from Death no longer revives allies, increases outgoing healing. Banshee's Wail no longer increases outgoing healing. So a little bit of a nod to potentially some more support Scourge when we get the Alacrity going there and support. Or Scourge, excuse me.
Yeah, I think a big piece of this as well is that Obviously,
Oh,
Scourge
so they're
right
giving
now
it a
on
lack,
Live
but
is
nerfing heal
very
Scourge
good
as it
at
used to
very
be.
specific things.
Like
It
it.
is very, very good at reviving, and it has a ton of barrier output. And if we were just to add Alacrity to Scourge with basically no changes otherwise, it would probably be, a little insane maybe. It would just have all the tools that it currently has as an Alacrity support build. And we were a little bit concerned with what that would look like. So there are a few changes in these patch notes that are bringing down some of Scourge's revive power, some of its barrier output, because we are introducing Alacrity and we want it to be pretty competitive and not be clearly the best in slot Alac healer.
And so, same note sort of here is that Transfusion only pulls down allies on its initial activation instead of on pulse, and reduce the revive pulse from 2 to 1 when used with Scourge in PvE.
Oh, I
only.
love that.
So if
That
you're
was so
slotting Scourge,
annoying.
If you're in PvE, the revive pulse has gone down. Quickening Thirst has been reworked. Again, Life Force when you strike an enemy with a dagger skill. And then we've got a little bit of a change to Life Siphon, which I will show off quickly in game. Before we talk about
this is a
these
nice little update. It makes the skill a bit more closer to like that
Wait,
Ray
what?
of Judgment
They're
type
killing
skill
Life
where
Siphon?
you're going to do a
This is
single
so much
attack,
fun.
strike an enemy, and then that's going to do the you have Roy really holding a grudge against the Guardian NPC after
I
last
don't know what
time.
you're talking about.
But
wait,
yeah,
so
Life
they
Siphons
buffed
are
it
going to do an initial
massively.
strike the enemy, and
Yeah,
then
I've heard
that
that
Life
out.
Siphon is going to happen without needing to continue to channel. This is just a
We're
nice
still
little
not on
usability
here.
improvement. It's honestly just a lot more powerful. It's gonna
Wow,
let you
this skill was
fire the
already
skill
feeling
whenever
pretty
you think
busted when I was
Titan
just
on
running
that life siphon
around,
is happening,
messing around with it in PvP.
and not be locked into
And
that
they just
long
made it even
channel.
better.
We've
That's
we've
nice for
reduced the
Dagger to
cast
get
time
buff.
of Life Siphon so many times.
Yeah,
trying
they
to get this channel
buffed
behavior
the
to
skill
work.
3 and had
It's
really
just
good
never quite
synergy
gotten there, and we
with
felt
3
like
into
we
2.
do want
And
this
so that's going to be even stronger.
to be like a reliable, almost like
I was
more
like
of a
knocking
bruisery
half
weapon.
the people's
Bruisery
health bars
Mayhem,
off
we
with
see a
that
little bit of
with
the
3
Quickening
into
Thirst
2.
change, making
And it's
dagger
nowhere
skills
near
give you
meta
life
right
force.
now.
Obviously, Life Siphon hits 9 times. It's going to be 9% life force, or yeah, I believe it's 1% per hit right now. But really solidifying this as a bit more life force, a bit more sustain, self-sustain, a bit more of that bruiser side of things with the Necro Dagger. So this change to Life Siphon should hopefully make the weapon feel a lot more usable as well.
Absolutely. All right, so Signet of Suffering, kind of almost opposite of what we were just talking about with boon removal, which is that the trait has been reworked, and so now it will Signet skills will remove boons from affected foes. But we
Notably,
have
one boon in
Right.
World vs. World.
a boon, yes, in in World vs. World. And we also, I believe, did also reduce the amount of boons ripped from Locust Signet by 1, which I don't think is on here, but we've got that going.
Yes, in World v. World only, Locust will be 1 boon rip baseline. That is correct.
Yeah, so obviously 2 with
Microphone activated.
we got some.
So obviously, I mean, I'll give a quick spiel about the Signet trait. This is a different flavor of cooldown reduction because the way that it gives CDR is a little bit more interesting, but it's still kind of always felt like a trait that isn't very good at the same time. So like while we're looking at CDR traits, we saw the Signet trait and decided, well, let's just rework it. And obviously, Signets of Suffering a long time ago, some people may remember the trait
Signet
when
trait.
it corrupted boons and granted might and reduced the recharge of Signet skills, and it was very, very, very powerful. Obviously, it was in the Grandmaster slot at that time. So now, as a Master Tier trait, we still felt like the boon rip component was good, and it's like a very threatening, very necro identity is a lot of boon rip. So giving that back, not making it a corrupt, so it doesn't go too crazy, but just giving a lot of potential access to boon rip, and retooling some of these signets as well. We see like reducing the number of Conti transfers on Plague Signet so that we can justify bringing the cooldown a bit lower, down from 45 all the way to 35. So now these Signet builds, maybe even Signet of Spite. Signet of Spite maybe a little bit too greedy, but Locust and Plague Signet are both quite good. We obviously have lesser Vampirism in the Blood Magic trait line, and even Vampirism on the healing slot. Potentially a lot of boon rip. So I'm really interested to see if like this version of Signets of Suffering really allows Necros to dive deep into that boon rip build, and especially on the PvP side where that was something that existed a long time ago, that maybe in a little bit of an overtuned
That might
fashion.
be real.
Now it's coming back in a bit more of a
Microphone
hopefully
activated.
balanced and healthy fashion. So pretty interested to see how this trade plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So here we got some of the first changes here for the conditions, boon stuff. So Unholy Feast now removes boons instead of converting them into conditions. The damage multiplier will be going up, sort of as a bit of a reflection in World vs. World and PvP. And then
Yeah,
unholy burst
notably the
will be going down.
the damage is basically getting shifted more into the front half. Obviously, Unholy Burst only triggers if you hit an enemy under a certain health threshold. So while we definitely want to change this from a boon corrupt into a boon rip because it felt just a bit more thematic for Axe to be doing boon removal rather than doing corruption. It's not really a Condi weapon at all. That is obviously a slight reduction in its power level, so we wanted to give a bit more consistency in its damage, and that's really what these first two notes are doing. Spiteful Spirit
same
obviously
sort of
just
thing.
uses the Unholy Feast-esque skill attack, so it is going to get the same behavior.
Exactly. Devouring Darkness is going to have its cooldown increased from 10 to 18 seconds in World versus World only. So this is a very big nod to just the amount of ranged pressure from strips and corrupts. Again, kind of the Scourge and Necro in general have in World versus World. So this, really prevents you from being able to use this skill multiple times without, waiting for that cooldown. While you're on, every weapon spot basically. Now you'd have to sit on the weapon set for almost 20 seconds if you wanted to get 2 charges or 2 hits off of it. And again, really looking at the ranged, a lot of the ranged abilities that are going to be ripping boons here as opposed to maybe more of the melee ones. But again, Enfeebling Blood will no longer convert boons into conditions, but the cooldown for competitive modes is also going to be going down there. And then Lesser Enfeebling Blood, same thing for the boon rip.
Yeah, Enfeebling Blood. Just a quick note on this one, because kind of over the
so
the
they're
years we've
killing
seen a lot
all
of
of the
necro skills just kind of get boon
conversion
corrupts or
and
boon
turning
rips
it all to
tacked
just
onto
rip.
them. And
like it.
That's a
as we're
pretty huge
looking at
nerf.
boon rips in general for World
Said they were doing
World,
something
obviously
like
Enfeebling
that
Blood is like
earlier.
a
I think
notable
Scourge
one
still
on
has
the
a trait
list.
that says whenever they rip
We
a
felt
boon,
that
they
just
convert it
removing it
instead.
entirely was kind of the right decision because we could then focus
I guess
Dagger
it's
on what
more
Dagger's trying to
specialized.
do. It has Feebling Blood, which is weakness and bleeding, and obviously has
Maybe
the
with the dagger buff, I'll finally be
Condi
able to play
transfers from
Power
Deathly
Reaper
Swarm.
without it
We
being
can
a
really
joke.
focus it on
Maybe.
those
I legit
things,
don't know if I'm
and
gonna play
if
this
we
game
need
anymore.
more Boon Rip on Necro, we're obviously adding some with the Signet trait, but
They're
we
killing
want
my
them to
build
be
that
in like
hard. I don't know
more
what I'm gonna play. It's the only thing I'm enjoying
more
right now.
specific locations. I think having like Corrupt Boon is a great example. We want Corrupt Boon to be a good skill and a viable skill to remove boons because it's a single moment doing a large amount
They
of boon
want
rip
Corrupt Boon
as
to be a
opposed to
good
having
skill.
like all these single boon rips or boon corrupts scattered
If
all
they
over
want
the
it to be a
place.
good skill in PvP,
It's just a little bit more difficult
when everything
to
else
play
already
around. It
corrupts
feels like you're
boons.
just always getting ripped.
Yeah, but nothing corrupts spoons. This kind of sucks.
The boon rip is coming. Make sure
It
that
means
you're
less
ready
stun
for it,
breaks.
play around it eventually.
All right, so Scourge. So Desert Empowerment has been moved to Grandmaster tier, which was replacing Feed from Corruption. Barrier from this trait will only apply around the shade and will affect 5 targets. This trait now also grants alacrity to allies when you grant them barrier.
I don't know. In this meta, that
Notably, I
seems
believe this is not
questionable
alacrity in
with
competitive modes.
how strong a lot of the powered builds are because of their
I
boom
believe it
spam.
is
I
alacrity.
was gonna say a lot of things just get
Look at that,
boons for
great.
free.
Alacrity to all modes. Excellent. Sandstorm Shroud now pulse barrier to allies near the Scourge before it detonates. Embrace of Grit no longer causes Sand Flare to grant barrier to allies, but it will grant Might when you apply barrier in addition to its previous effects, and Sand Flare...
Abrasive Grit, basically going back to the old behavior. Sand Flare, this is a change that happened a while ago where the problem that was identified is that Sand Flare was a bit too free in how much barrier it gave to allies. And, on a DPS Scourge, you could just still give so much barrier to allies, so it got tied into Abrasive Grit. But realistically, we feel like the right change is just reduce the amount of barrier to allies, and we can tune the heal power scaling so that support builds can still get that good barrier application from Sand Flare, but Abrasive Grit can just kind of go back to what it used to be.
All right. I don't know if you want to talk about Alacrity at all.
What's up, Kashina?
I think I gave a lot
How
of
are
the
you?
spiel already.
Fair enough.
Like, we're definitely bringing down some of Scourge's support potential just to bring it a bit more in line with other support builds while it is now getting Alacrity. It'll definitely be something we're keeping an eye on. I mean, I say that about everything. It's a meme at this point, I'm sure. We'll be keeping a close eye on basically every large rework type change. We're always keeping a close eye on it. So there's that, I guess.
That's actually why we hired Taylor, so we had more people to keep eyes on things.
More eyes. Yes.
More eyes, yes.
Most important.
Indeed. All right, so Sand Cascade, Roost Base, Barrier of the Skill, level 80 from 1188 to 916, PvE only.
Too crazy.
Yep, and then reduce ceiling attribute scaling. Manifest Sand Shade is going to have its shade duration reduced. I don't know if you had a note
So
for that
this
one.
is a nod to how sand shades actually work. And obviously, as I wonder how many people, I'm not reading the chat, so I don't know how many people are freaking out about this, but like theoretically, especially without the change to manifest sandshade, Scourge could potentially upkeep alacrity on 10 targets because you could have three shades out, and barrier is going to be applied around all of these shades, and then give them alacrity, which is very, very scary. So this is still going to be possible a little bit because you could burst press all three of your shades and then use a barrier skill to give a bunch of allies alacrity. But that won't be really sustainable in the long term because then you'll have a lot of time where you just don't have shades. And it's a little bit of a quirk of like how sand shades just work, and it's something that we need to keep a close eye on as this gets played on live.
Where have I heard that before?
I obviously want Scourge to be like an alacrity build and in line with other alacrity builds, so it should give meaningful alacrity to 5 targets and definitely not to 10 targets.
Sadistic Searing and Trail
Sadistic
might
Searing, same
make
sort of deal as
the build
before,
slightly more relevant in PvP, but I don't know if it's enough.
Reduction traits, the trait cooldown reduction traits,
weird
but in competitive modes, it will have its burning duration
only gives
increased
one
a
stack
little
of stability
bit,
to the
while no
Scourge.
longer reduces the cooldown.
I guess they just don't
Trail
want to give
Vanquish is
stability
going
to
to have some
Necro.
of that cooldown baked into the
Yeah,
baseline,
Scourge doesn't
so
deserve
obviously
stability.
modes. Breach is going to also have its cooldown lowered in game modes. However, also notably, it's going to have its duration reduced.
That skill is
kind of
plus.
the
I don't
same
know if
thing
it ever
as
gave more, but it
the
used to
Wizards
be way
Championship
stronger.
Well, it gives it
going
to
down
people who
from
walk
43
into
seconds. Same
sand
sort of deal.
behind
It's a
you.
really large AoE that's on the ground for
I think you
a
can,
long
like,
time,
go in and out of it, but you can't if
basically
you're the
just completely
Scourge.
stops pushes. And so we're just lowering that a little bit. Maybe make melee clashes happen a little bit more frequently, happen a little bit quicker. Desiccate will now also grant Fury. Had some might stacks increased. Cooldown again.
Making sure that Scourge support has access to these offensive boons that many heal support, hero alacrity support builds have access to.
Yep, a little bit of a rework for Serpent Siphon, which now sends a serpent to a target area, detonates upon arrival. Allies in the area grant barrier, gain barrier, regen, and Aegis. Enemies would be poisoned and have a boon converted into Torment. And then the cooldown also lowered, just again, reflection of that trait removal. And then important to note here, which is that if you take Path of Corruption, this will now increase the cooldown of Nefarious Favor by 50% in Wordless World only. Again, a little bit of a nod to how often you're getting these sort of ranged boon corrupts while you're on Scourge and World versus World.
Yeah, and notably, this is tied specifically to Path of Corruption because in the future, not really for this update, I mean, obviously there's Alacrity Scourge in all game modes, and we'll see if support Scourge is realistically a real build in competitive. That is something we like to see in the future. We're not really expecting that all the tools will be there for this update, but in a future update, we would like to really establish Scourge as a viable support build in competitive modes, and that's a big problem. There's a lot of Scourge things that we need to make sure aren't too prevalent on the support build, while it's also able to give support to allies. And so in that future world, we're expecting Nefarious Favor to be an important piece of the Scourge support build, but we didn't want to just bump up the.
I don't know if that's possible in PvP because the just inherent downsides of Necro make it way too susceptible to good classes.
When it has this additional effect,
it doesn't have Shroud.
Rewarded with a higher.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't see how Scourge can ever support itself or be tanky on its own.
We got changed to Septic Corruption. This is a slight nod to, Harbinger damage is very high right now, both on just, DPS Harbinger and Quickness Harbinger as well. So this is going to be a bit of a reduction to the overall damage there. And then Vials, cooldown reduction trait. No longer grants cooldown reduction. More Vuln stacks. Very exciting. This is something we could potentially do a larger rework to. The Vuln is like kind of thematic, as all these elixirs do apply conditions. So we bumped up the stacks to like 7. We could even bump it up a little bit higher. Wouldn't be surprised if we end up reworking this one down the road because it's just maybe not exciting enough. But then we also see many cooldown reductions rolled in for elixir skills.
Indeed. And look at that, even more elixirs.
That's the end of the Necro changes. So we have one profession left.
We do?
I believe. Is there even a profession left?
I thought that was the end of the stream. I was about to do my outro, actually.
Yeah, nothing important, I guess.
I don't think so.
But I guess we should talk about the Mesmer profession.
Oh, okay. Mesmer is getting some changes. I couldn't remember if we had
Virtuoso, that. Chronomancer, and there's some Mirage updates in this update.
Yeah, nothing too crazy. We will show off some of the dagger changes there for Virtuoso. In game.
We will start off with some, as always, core Mesmer.
All right, so
You wanna
Signal of
talk about core
Humility.
Mesmer, Roy?
So
Yep.
MOA is going to have its cooldown lowered for PvE only. Very important to note there, just to make that a easier skill to take in PvE for break bar damage. And then again, we talked about this a lot with Necro, obviously, but looking at some of these ranged boon rips a little bit, we're not changing the amount of boon rips at all in null field, but we are just lowering the range. So you do have to be a little bit closer to be able to get value from that skill. And then same sort of deal, lowering the range on Temporal Curtain, just to reduce the effectiveness of this skill at such a high range, especially given all of the sort of line skill tweaks you can do with it. And then Illusionary Membrane, reduced damage reduction from 10 to 5 in PvP only. Chaotic Persistence, reduced concentration and expertise in PvP.
A handful of nerfs to the Chaos Straight Line in PvP. We'll see a couple more on the next slide. And then a nice update here at the bottom. Escape Artist. This is kind of a pretty unused trait. This is mostly a nod to World vs. World, as giving an option that allows phantasms to strike enemies before dying in the game mode where 50 enemies might be attacking in AoE at all times. So phantasms will now have distortion when they're spawned.
Exactly. All right, Chronomancer. So as we mentioned before, doing some reworks to Chronomancer and looking at some of the usability there for some boon builds. So stretch time has been reworked. Flow time now affects nearby allies.
So it's
Grant alacrity to
literally
nearby
just
allies when you
on
summon a phantasm.
Summon that's good.
Seize the moment. No longer causes time to grant quickness. Instead, grants quickness to nearby allies when you summon a phantasm.
Yeah, I was talking to Darwin.
and
Just
then we've
like
got a couple
it's weird
of
that
wild
it's not the
changes
same
there.
thing.
Want to talk about the boon builds?
Just an option.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a similar vein of just shifting more of the alacrity or quickness onto the core mechanics of the profession. So in this case, it's going to be like shatters and phantasms. These are things that are available to all Mesmer builds. You don't have to take specific utility slots in order to get access to these boons. I mean, we've talked about this a bunch of times in the stream already, so that's really the gist of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hop into the Virtuoso stuff.
Virtuoso, indeed. So as we mentioned, we got some dagger changes, and I will jump in game and show those off while Cal.
Yep. So we have some. I guess we'll talk about the dagger changes first, because the top notes are all about defensive reductions. Even in PvE, we see that Virtuoso might have a bit too much active defense, especially with the introduction of distortion. We feel like that was correct, and we want Virtuoso to have access to distortion. But 1 second per blade in PvE, it's now going down to the 3/4 second that competitive modes uses. And the big change here is that blade turn Requiem, the block will actually no longer be a block. It will just occur instantly, no longer channeled, and it will. The intent here is that this is going to be mostly the cleaving AoE damage shatter now, because we obviously have a lot of single target stuff on all of the initial blade songs, and now Requiem, this will be like the PB AoE.
Oh, the 3 is ground targeted now.
A decent amount of damage in an area around you, and this is just trying to make sure that Virtuoso does not have too much innate defense. And really, I think introducing this kind of AoE cleave, obviously what the skill already does, but now it is instant, not requiring a channel, a bit more flexible in how you use it as a
they've really
skill.
reworked a lot of those skills.
One last note on the defensive nerfs is Blade Renewal. The channel duration is reduced, which means you'll have less distortion. It will give you the same amount of blades over the shorter interval. You'll just have less distortion uptime. And now, hopping into the dagger changes, the goal with these changes...
I mean, skill 3 was miserable to actually cast before.
These skills a bit more reliable as damaging skills, especially in competitive modes where enemies will move a lot more frequently.
You mean reliable as in they don't cast half the time you press them?
If the original target of the skill is in range, the returning blades will lock onto the enemy. So I think Roy already showed this on stream. But instead of just returning to the Mesmer and making, it's very difficult to hit all these blades. Even the outgoing shot is much more reliant on that shotgun, like hit all 3 projectiles as you throw them. Now it's going to be much more reliable because you're going to throw it out, and then if there's a target there, the blades will kind of latch on and go at that target. So a very consistent return damage. And kind of in a similar vein, Unstable Blade Storm, instead of that super slow moving projectile, we've changed it to be a ground targeted spell. And this is going to have 2 damaging components. One is just going to be a pulse damage that happens obviously at the area, and it's still going to have that projectile component where periodically it will shoot projectiles.
Weird that Mesmer gets all the reworks always.
And this really gives us the opportunity to balance it a little bit different per game mode, because in World v World, for example, where projectiles are so much less reliable, we can load a lot more of the damage into the pulse damage. So if you're catching enemies,
Warrior got adjustments.
a lot more damage.
My build got
and the projectile component will do a bit less damage because so much projectile hate, it just won't be super
Yeah, they
valuable.
rework one
Whereas in, like,
trait in the
competitive
jankiest
PvE,
class
or
just to
PvP,
delete it.
for example,
Much.
having less of the damage on the pulsing component and more of the damage in the
Shitty part is
projectiles,
they could
so
just
it's
put
more
the
reliable,
alacrity on Immortal Dragon, which literally no one
hitting,
does, and all it does is grant you
enemies in
protection.
range of
But
it.
they're just, I think
And
they might
overall,
just
the
hate
damage
me.
should be
I
about
don't
the
know.
same in PvE.
I don't know why.
Obviously, it's just going to hit a bunch
But I
of
get
times.
for posting,
It's
I
like
made it to plat
the
with
projectile damage has been
Bladesworn, and it was really hard
I
on
believe
their
it's the
forums,
same
I
actually,
guess.
and then the pulse damage is just a fraction of the actual damage that the slow-moving projectile did because it will add up to the same number. Very exciting.
Very exciting indeed. All right. A couple more things here for Virtuoso. Twin Blade Restoration now always cleanses conditions when healing. First Blade will also grant Aegis, and Second Blade will grant Vigor. Second Force, reduce cooldown to 25 seconds in all game modes. Second Mind, increase bleeding duration. Just to kind of give a little bit more of an option for a lot of builds, specifically in competitive modes than Psychic Riposte, potentially. Make this feel a little bit of a stronger trait. And this trait, Psychic Riposte...
Really just make it a lot more reliable, because right now, Psychic Riposte, it's only ever going to do anything when you're actively being attacked. And if no one tries to interact with you, the trait is actually not doing a whole lot because you have no attacks to block or evade. So moving some of the value onto just every time you dodge is going to allow you to get access to that unblockable effect when you need it, and also just make a little bit more blade generation when you're not being attacked.
Right.
So
the overall
the goal is kind of improve the usability and
Mesmer's so busted.
Really just the usability of this trait and make sure that it does what it wants.
Yeah, this balance patch seems to be focused on all the classes and weapons that were already usable.
A little bit more on demand, on reaction type deal.
All right, done with Virtuoso. That must be the end of the stream, right?
Yes.
Oh.
So we did just decide to put up the teaser one more time in case. I don't actually know why we have the teaser here at the end. Doesn't really make any sense. We've talked about everything. I guess we
did say that there are Mirage
changes, right? We can't actually keep lying about that.
We actually forgot. Someone screwed up the order of the slides. It was probably me. But yes, as we can see on this teaser, there was a Mirage mirror, which said, maybe there's some changes about Mirage. And so let's just no changes to Mirage mirrors actually. It was just trying to say it's showing that this light armor character on this screen is probably a Mirage. The Ranger can't make a Mirage mirror. The Spectre can't make a Mirage mirror. Pink Moa, maybe it should make Mirage mirrors. They're both kind of a similar color palette.
But yes, all right. So
but there is a Mirage here, and there are some changes to Mirage.
We've got some change. Well, we've got a change to Mirage, really.
At least one change to Mirage.
Mirages can no longer dodge while under the effects of crowd control or mobilize. We felt that the ability to do so was a little bit too strong.
Great. Yeah. Sounds right to me.
All right.
Okay, but seriously, let's just go to the next slide. We don't want to slow roll this too much. This is obviously a nerf as part of a change that allows Mirage to have 2 dodges in competitive modes. And this is a thing, and this is actually most of the chaos nerfs that we saw previously are also kind of a nod to Mirage, because I'm going to give a spiel about Mirage real quick and we'll see how long it actually goes.
Should I leave?
Obviously it's been, like 3.5 years since we removed the second dodge from Mirage in competitive modes, and it's because the dodge mechanic, Mirage's dodge mechanic, being able to dodge pretty much any time, while using another skill, while crowd controlled, while immobilized, it was just
this took them 3 years.
So insanely powerful. Like it broke all the rules of how dodges are supposed to work. And I guess that's kind of Mesmer's thing. They like to break the rules, but it did so in a way that was too powerful that we felt that the best solution at the time was to reduce the Mirage's endurance, because we didn't really want to touch it in PvE. Obviously, the previous change where Mirage cannot dodge under the effects of crowd control or immobilize, this is a game-wide change. We felt like it didn't make a whole lot of sense to split it. We were just kind of redefining what the Mirage dodge mechanic is a little bit, and this felt like the best compromise, because we've been talking about this internally for a long time as well, and we've gone through like all sorts of crazy ideas that even involve just reworking the dodge mechanic entirely, but that felt like it would be very, very just overly disruptive to PvE. And we realized that this change will affect PvE a little bit, but it's kind of the best compromise where this is kind of just how dodges should work anyway. If you face tank the CC, maybe you shouldn't be able to dodge the incoming attack that follows up.
Also, you still have
So
shatters.
this does maintain a lot of the key Mirage
It's still
functionality where you
fine.
can still dodge while using other skills. But if you get caught by an MO, get caught by a CC, you will not be able to dodge. And we are,
Oh,
we
back
see a
to
couple other
Mirage
nerfs
for
to
PvP.
ambush skills. These are things that didn't really get touched way back in the February update where we did just take the dodge away from Mirage and we said, okay, you're going to have one dodge, so you're going to have one ambush, and these can be a certain power level. With the introduction of the second dodge again, we are nerfing a few of these things, preemptively looking at the chaos trait line. We are, hedging a little bit against the power level that we've seen with Mirage in the past. And going forward, we do want Mirage to be playable. And obviously the goal of introducing a second dodge back to Mirage is that we do want a future where Mirage is a viable pick in these game modes. But at the same time, we don't want it to be at the level that it used to be. Obviously, the game's changed a lot. And it may or may not have been as dominant as it was if it just kind of came in with only the changes to the dodge. So we are maybe overshooting a little bit, but we'd rather see Mirage be a little bit undertuned coming in and give us the opportunity to bring it up over time, as opposed to just dropping Mirage into the game and it becomes an oppressive dominant force, which hopefully with all of these changes it won't be. As with all the other things, but maybe even more so, this is probably the change we will be keeping the closest eye on with the changes in this patch, just because it's a pretty significant shift. There's obviously a lot of preemptive nerfs or preemptive reductions to Mirage with the addition of the second dodge, and our goal is not to make Mirage unplayable with 2 dodges, so we will make some follow-up adjustments as needed, and those will probably even come outside of the usual balance update cycle. This will go live, people start playing with Mirage again, all 2 dodges, very exciting, and we'll get a lot of good data around how strong Mirage actually is and what needs to be improved. Yeah. And for anyone in the chat who may have made a character name that is a meme about 1 dodge Mirage, you can definitely go purchase a name change contract in the Black Lion store.
Yeah, those are available.
And fix that problem.
Yeah, so you no longer have to make fun of 1 dodge Mirage, because it won't exist.
Yep, there will now always be 2
great.
dodges.
Yeah, always be 2 dodges.
Yeah, we obviously saved this for last. This is actually the last slide. There's no more secrets waiting in the wings. But it's probably for the best. We've been at this for an hour and 45 minutes.
Close to 2 hours. I'm a little disappointed we couldn't get 2 hours. I think maybe I talked a little bit too fast in some cases, and you didn't spiel quite as much as maybe you could have.
That's true.
So why don't we just hang out for a little?
You just hang out for 13 minutes.
Yeah. No, we will wrap things up. Obviously, I'm sure players are going to want to get over to the forums to read the post. As always, the forum post will be coming after the end of this stream, just momentarily. So if you missed some changes, you want to go back and read something, you now will be able to do so. And again, as always, please make sure to give us your feedback based on the upcoming changes. We are going to be looking to read, the forum posts, read various, other feedback places, as Cal always likes to mention. I don't actually have anything to do outside of reading feedback on the weekends, so that is all I will be doing. So please make sure you actually supply me with content. But yeah, give us your feedback. We'll be looking for it. We hope that you like the changes. If you don't, let us know. And yeah, we'll be.
Yep. And I'll also just reiterate that there will be some things that we covered in the stream that will not be in the preview, just due to the nature of all the timelines about internal processes and stuff. So if there are things that you saw on this stream today that are not in the patch notes, this stream is the most updated version, essentially, of the patch notes. And there will also be just additional changes that come in the final release notes that will go live with the update itself.
Right. Yeah. So if there's something on the forum that wasn't, or excuse me, if there was something on the stream that is not on the forum, whatever was on the stream is how it is going to be. Yeah. All right.
Yep. So
any last
wrap it up.
words there, Cal?
Last words.
Well,
thanks everyone who stuck with us the whole time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back, and I always go back and watch the VOD to see all the comments, because we don't actually read the stream or read the comments while we're live. Some people believe this is pre-recorded, but it actually is not. This is a live stream.
I could go put a shoe on my head, but I don't think anyone really wants to see that. So.
That only works if someone in chat says put shoe on head.
Oh right, I can't read chat, so. We're out of luck.
Yeah, so unfortunate, but again, thanks everyone for sticking with us. This was probably the longest one of these we've done for a long time. I mean, I remember back in the day when we did. I'm just gonna start rambling about random stuff now.
I really shouldn't
I don't-
ever ask you if you have any final words. I should just do the outro because then we'll
I don't know
actually
if
we'll be stuck
anyone
here for-
remembers like when we did this specialization update before Heart of Thorns, and there was a balance preview stream for that, and it was like a 5-hour balance preview because it went over like every single trait
Wait,
line for
before
every
Heart of
single profession.
Thorns? Do you mean?
Before Heart of Thorns, the specialization update when we reworked all the trait lines.
Right, yeah. I thought you were talking about the End of Dragon streams.
No,
Oh, yeah.
no, because that was literally like a 5-hour balance preview stream, and
Yeah.
you know one day we'll get there. Roy and I, we have some plans.
Yeah.
To...
I mean, yeah, we'll read. I'll work on reading slow.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna stop
anyway,
Cal
we're
from
gonna
talking anymore,
let's sign
and I'm
off.
gonna actually do
Good
the
call.
outro. Thank you very much for watching. As always, give us your feedback. We'll be reading it, and we hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Again, this was for the June 27th balance patch upcoming, and yeah, until next time, we'll see you all in the mists. Have a lovely day. Take it easy.
Dang, it was only comment number 5.
Mm.
Okay, well, I'll be playing other video games now. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, this definitely was not exciting.
Not how I was excited. That's not even a joke. If they change Daring Dragon, I don't know what I'm gonna play. I legitimately might quit this game after 11 years.
Yeah, and it looks like they're being extra careful with Mirage too.
I mean, I can play Mirage. That's not the point. I was just finally enjoying a warrior build, but it's whatever. Sorry to end on a downer, chat. Yeah, go watch the VOD. Really weird changes. Honestly, good stuff for PvE. Not so much for PvP. I don't know. We'll see how it shakes out. Maybe it'll be good. I don't know. This is SeaMonster. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. It definitely makes me sad. It looks like they're buffing things that were already strong. Didn't really seem to rework anything that was bad. Made things that were like barely viable worse.
That was
it's just really
weird.
depressing overall.
All right, well, sorry about that. Hopefully you can get some sunshine. I'm Pseudo. This is SeaMonster. We'll be doing our raids on Sunday. Probably. We'll see. And yeah, I'll see you later. Peace.